The moment you thought everything was normal was the moment your fate was sealed. Some stories are meant to be forgotten, buried under the weight of time. But not this one. This is the tale of a destiny rewritten, where the line between hero and villain blurs, and nothing is ever as it seems. Prologue. Good morning, America, and of course the rest of the world. President Musk stood on a stage with flags flying behind him and fanfare still dying down. The most beloved president in American history spoke in a firm tone. I am here today to tell you all some very serious news. Over the next few weeks, it is imperative that everyone goes to a government building and is issued a data core. Zul, holding up a small, shining gem, he continued speaking, doing his level best not to let his fingers tremble too much. Within the next month, this world is going to become a very dangerous place. For that reason, we and the world at large have prepared a refuge, a safe haven for humanity to weather the impending storm. Until we contain the dangers of this new reality, it will be impossible for us as a people to survive on Earth. The media erupted, shouting questions at him so loudly that not a single voice could be distinguished. He shouted over them, hoping that everyone would hear his message. All of our troops, all government employees, all people who hope to survive longer than 1 month, please go to your nearest government building and get a core. They're free, and I will now demonstrate their purpose. He held up the gem so that everyone could see it. These gems act as a key, a storage device, and a path to safety. Already tens of thousands of people are in this new world, not knowing that they're fighting to save literally all of us. None of them are coming back. At the time of this broadcast, all people connected to the game Eternium are living their true life there. As the man who sent them, it is my duty to join them as well. Take the core and hold it to your head. That is all you need to do. Good luck and Godspeed. Finishing his speech, he held the core to his head and vanished without a trace. The gem went with him. Utter silence filled all media outlets in America at the same time, a feat that had never before been accomplished. Then, the world went mad. Chapter 1. A burst of noise nearly knocked Joe from his kneeling position as the crowd of gathered nobles and various factions burst into applause. King Henry wrapped an arm around Joe's shoulder, as much to steady him as to show his favor. A little strange, isn't it? Joe looked at the king in wonder. Everything sounded different. Everything reverberated with different tones than he was used to hearing. What was that? Wait, is that my voice? Ah. The king bobbed his head in understanding, every slight motion seeming to suck the air from the room. By your expression, and the way you are clutching at your ears, the gift you have been granted must be magical synesthesia. I was wondering what you would earn. I know you are keeping your eyes off of your notifications out of politeness, but I would look into that more closely when you leave here. As a secondary gift, let me increase the land allotment that you earn from the part you played in that little war. Joe heard a ding, but again refrained from looking over at the blinking notification. The king spoke to the room at large after stendarn. Nastadnan, his motion calculated to force clapping to a halt, so that his words would have maximum impact on the gathering. My people, we are here today to honor a man that not only played a large part in ending the Wolfman uprising, but also saved my very life. This man, Joe. Here, the king motioned at Joe and silenced the excited whispering that had broken out, has earned my favor and the favor of my people by extension. I deem the first of his steps toward nobility as complete, should he complete 2 more tasks of such aid to the kingdom. He will be granted the rights of full nobility." The room exploded into furious noise, and Joe could have sworn that he somehow saw a smug look on the king's face through the armor that blocked all sight. Of course, this is easier said than done. How many times can one man save a king who has only ever needed to be saved once? Polite laughter broke out, but the smiles were cut with calculated staring that felt anything except excited or happy. "Let the feast begin." Joe sat to the right of the king, only 2 seats away from the man himself. The queen sat next to Joe, but both of the regents remained as still as cut stone the entire meal. The prince, sitting on the left of the king, kept glancing at Joe in confusion, as if he had seen him before but could not remember where. Joe remembered quite clearly it was one of the most unexpected deaths he had experienced in the game, and if he hadn't been nearly immediately given recompense, Joe may have held a grudge. As it stood, it was likely better not to point out errors perpetrated by the crowned prince. At dinner. "Joe, thank you again for what you did to save my husband." The queen was speaking in a low tone and hadn't turned her head to address him. That would have instantly drawn attention, since the movement would have caused all the gathered people to choke. I thought all was lost. Also, how is the wildebeest? Is that what this is? Joe inspected the haunch of meat, and sure enough, he got the expected result. Perception check plus knowledge check, success. This is a perfectly seared slice of meat from a wildebeest. Stamina plus 10 for the next 2 hours. Wow. Joe allowed his excitement to show through. I've never seen normal food cooked well enough to give bonuses by itself. Oh, it's delicious, ma'am. That is your majesty. As for the king, as happy as I am to have saved him, I truly can't take much credit. At the end of the day, it was an incredibly self-serving act. You refer to the penalties imposed on males of our race? The queen shifted a tiny amount, and Joe assumed she had needed to hold in a shrug. It would have been far worse for me and mine, Joe. We would have lost Henry. As for being self-serving, I disagree. While there were sure to be the benefits of having a king, I was told that you crossed the battlefield not only with terrible burns, but also missing a leg. No one would have faulted you for not making the journey. Ugh, I'm so hungry. The words were not what Joe expected to hear coming from her next. Our battle prowess makes more regular aspects of life somewhat more difficult. If I wanted to tear into that meat with you, no one else but Henry could eat at the same time. I told him we should have eaten before the ceremony. I do have one more question for you, and it may seem a little strange. Right, please? Joe nodded slightly as an indication for her to continue, and refrained from taking another bite of food while he waited for her to speak. How did you revive Henry? Seeing Joe's confused expression, she tried again. Please don't misunderstand, but I know how the abilities you wield work, and there is no way that you should have been able to bring him back to life. Did you somehow have a divine favor to use? I didn't. Joe hadn't even considered his actions. He had gone into the battlefield knowing that he could save the king. Now that he thought about it, he could only resurrect people his own level or lower. There was no way that King Henry, the battle tyrant, was a lower level than him. Well, I guess I have no idea how I did it. I just did it. The queen paused. I would like you to ignore propriety and take a moment to look at your notifications. Please let me know if you see anything different, at least in a negative manner. Joe nodded gravely and intentionally let his notifications flow over him. Skill gained, magical synesthesia, novice eye. One of the 4 magical senses that can be granted by the king or queen of Ardania. From now on, all items holding magic within them will hum softly to your senses. As a consequence of your hearing being enhanced, all sounds will be interpreted differently than before. Even voices. Higher levels of this skill will allow for more robust sounds to be heard. Masters of this skill are rumored to weave magic by the sound of their mana alone. Effect: 1% increased mana. Auditory sensation, where N equals skill level. The King of Ardania has doubled the amount of land that you have been authorized to claim. All land must be contiguous and cannot have a current landowner in place. You are at a royal feast in your honor. Reputation gains with factions friendly to the crown are doubled for the duration. You are seated at the royal table. Reputation gains with factions friendly to the crown are doubled for the duration. I'm not seeing any issues, and I had read through all my notifications before coming here, Joe quietly informed the Queen. Would you please thank the king for me again if I don't get the chance? Magical synesthesia seems amazing. You don't know the half of it, she snorted softly. Just wait until it hits the upper ranks. No change in stats then. Everything is good? I'm glad to hear that you have not had any blowback for helping us so much. Stats? I don't think so. He hastily opened his status sheet and looked over his stats, wincing as he realized that there was indeed an issue, and a rather devastating one at that. Name: Joe, Tatum's chosen legend. Class: Mage. Actual: Rit Architect. Profession: Tenured Scholar. Actual: Arcanologist. Character: Level 15. Experience: 125,993. Experience to next level: 10,007. Rit Architect. Level 2. Experience: 2,190. Experience to next level: 810. Hit points: 220 out of 220. Mana: 963 out of 963. Mana regen: 1997 per second. Stamina: 195. Characteristic: Raw score modifier. Strength: 22, 122. Dexterity: 31, 131. Constitution: 27, 127. Intelligence: 72, 222. Wisdom: 66, 216. Charisma: 26, 126. Perception: 51, 2.01. Luck: 29, 129. Karmic luck: +3. I'm pretty sure I should have twice the amount of mana that I do right now, Joe confessed to the Queen as quietly as possible. It's normally doubled by my deity. That could indeed be a problem. She took in a deep breath. I'll arrange transport to the temples as soon as our meal is complete. You should find the issue at the source, after all. Unfortunately, if you leave right now, there will be the issue of breaking protocol, and many people will hold a grudge against you. I'd rather that didn't happen, Joe groaned as he looked over his stats once more. There was only one thing that he could do to mitigate the loss, and that was to pour a hefty amount of characteristic points into the intelligence stat. He had 15 points remaining from his sudden level increase, as well as 18 skill points, but he was unsure if using them was the best course of action. He reluctantly decided instead to wait until meeting with Tatum. As the feast slowed and people started loosening their belts, individuals began to wander around the area. Small social groups were forming, and some intrepid people began approaching the monarchs. To Joe's surprise, a few even came to speak with him. None of them really had much to say to each other, but Joe realized that by appearing friendly with him, they were also able to stand directly in front of the monarchs and have themselves noticed. Only one person really stood out from the others, and it was only by his actions. The man in question was dressed in colors just as garish as the other nobles in the room. But instead of speaking to Joe, the man simply looked at him like he was an interesting bug. This wouldn't have been a terrible issue but he was leaning across the table and had even slid Joe's plate to the side in order to get closer. This was the only word the man spoke, but a notification scrolled across Joe's vision that made his pulse race. Reputation increased. Your reputation with the Grand Jew of Ardania has increased from loathed to hated. Only 1,000 more points to reach hostile. Reputation increased. Your reputation with the Grand Jew of Ardania has increased from hated to hostile. Only 300 more points to reach cautious. After that gruff sound, the man simply turned and walked away. Joe managed to close his mouth, just now realizing that it had dropped during that uncomfortable exchange. What in the world was that? The Queen was staring at a plate of still steaming bread, and Joe could feel his breath catch as she twitched toward it. Oh, him. That's the ringleader. Pfft. His name is Robert. He runs one of the most popular forms of entertainment for nobility, a zoo that boasts the most unique creatures known to Eternium. I've no idea why people like the menagerie and clowns so much. For now, at least. I'll figure it out soon. I'm certain. He didn't seem to like me very much, Joe blatantly stated, taking a sip of wine and committing the man's face to memory. Whatever had happened in the past to get him to this point, the fact remained that he had somehow just gained 1,700 reputation points, at a minimum. Did I do something to upset him? It's highly unlikely. He doesn't get out much. The Queen sighed as a server took the bread basket away. Drat! Ah, well, they'll save some for me. As for Robert, he just doesn't like many people. Joe watched as the dance floor started to be populated. Feeling a tickle of dread, he saw several people eyeing him carefully. The king chuckled and spoke just loud enough for Joe to hear. I think it's time to sneak you out of here. That mark on your head will always get you access to the throne room if you need it. But do your best not to abuse the privilege. Good luck, Joe. How I envy you getting to leave early. We should have eaten before this started. I know. King Henry sounded exasperated, and Joe smiled. It was nice to see that some things were the same, regardless of social strata. Chapter 2. The unassuming carriage rolled to a stop in front of the temple district. Joe popped out and waved at the driver, who nodded and got the horses moving once more. The Richu architect looked up at the imposing building and frowned. Normally, he would be happy to be here, but right now he had a sneaking suspicion that something had gone very wrong. Walking through the temple, he heard an odd ringing in his ears that just barely tickled at his senses. Oddly enough, covering his ears did nothing to stop the ringing, and he realized that this must have something to do with his new hearing skill. Obviously, this place was highly enchanted or just stuffed full of mana, which would make sense at a giant hub of divine energy like this. Let's see. Neutral? Dark? Water? Joe followed the path to Tatum's altar just as he had before, but was surprised to find that it was closer to the center and more ornate than it had been previously. He touched it, expecting to find himself away on a mountaintop temple in the next instant, but was instead given a notification. System message. Hello, Joe. You are the chosen of Tatum, which is why you are being shown this message at all. The deity, Akul Tatum, is under review for his actions to this point. He has spent too much divine energy in too short an amount of time. Not only that, but he directly resurrected King Henry of Ardania using you as a medium. As such, certain passive bonuses will be unavailable to you. Specifically, you cannot be granted an extended mana pool, though your ability to resurrect others will remain. You are free to choose another deity to serve during this time, or you can work to pay off outsmarts' debt of 13 million divine energy. Good Lord, Tatum, Joe muttered to himself, shocked at the vast deficit. He continued reading through the message. What did you do? As you know, each place of power connected to a deity generates divine energy for them. There are 5 different standard types of divine sources as buildings. In order: altar, shrine, temple small, temple, and temple grand. Followers will also generate divine energy at a lower rate and less consistently as they may shift allegiance. The choice is yours to make. Well, obviously, I'm not gonna turn my back on a guy who destroyed himself to get me to this point. Dumb. Joe sighed and rubbed his bald head. Hold on, Tatum. I'll figure out a way to help you out, or else I'll see you whenever the current temples pay out enough. Quest gained. Paying a great debt. By choosing to remain faithful to your chosen deity, you have agreed to take on their debt. Find a way to pay off 13 million divine energy. Followers generate up to 25 DE a day. Altars generate 50 DE a day. Shrines generate 100 DE a day. Temples generate 250, 500, and 1,000 DE daily in order of rank. There may be other places of power that can be converted to your deity, but you will need to find that information yourself. Reward. Interaction with Tatum unlocked. Unknown. Failure. Tatum remains locked away. Sheesh, they are not making it easy on me. Joe patted the altar. Sorry, big guy. Even if I make this my mission for a good long time, I think you're stuck for a while. See ya when I see ya. Joe found that the fast travel system was still in place and that the altar had a built-in connection. Excellent. He had been worried that he would need to go to the town square in order to teleport back to the Wanderers Guild. With a tiny clap of air being displaced, he vanished from Ardania and appeared in the unnamed town that had been taken over by the Noble Guild. Instantly, he felt slightly queasy. What in the... He looked at his stats and noticed that the teleport had taken a full 1/8 of his mana. Normally, that was such a small amount that he wouldn't even notice it happening. Heck, by the time he noticed the loss, even now, his mana was already regenerating. Just one more limiting factor he hadn't even needed to observe until now. Are you Joe? A man came running up to him, wearing light clothing and winged sandals. Looks like they were right. They... Just wait in the egg-shaped Pathfinder Hall and old Joe will pop out of nowhere. Neat trick. I have a message for you. There's a guild leadership meeting starting in about 20 minutes. I know it's late, but I wasn't the one who set it up. The messenger handed over a small missive, gave the guild salute of a fist banging on his chest, and ran off once more. Joe hadn't even gotten a chance to respond. Some people's kids? Joe turned over the letter and pondered it momentarily. At least they gave me warning. Not like I have anything else to do right now. Sleep would be nice, though. After regrowing his leg and attending to Reggie, the traitor mage, Joe had left for the capital right away in order to claim whatever reward the king wanted to give him. No need to put that off for a rainy day. Rewards from a royal were best taken right away, just in case you lost their favor in the future. Plus, gaining a new sense that leveled, definitely worth making the trip. Joe looked around at the mid-sized temple he was in and sighed. At least there was 500 divine energy, guaranteed to go off to Tatum each day. At this rate, he would see the deity in 26,000 days, or a bit more than 71 years. Well, that just won't work for me. Joe started walking toward the newly built guild hall. It wasn't hard to find. In fact, it was one of the only buildings currently standing. Everything else, even if it had survived the initial blast of the detonating, whatever that thing was, had been so unsafe that the guild had ripped it apart. There were very few survivors from the original town. Most of them had been shuffled to the side to be taken care of by healers when the nuke-like object went off. There had been no sign of them respawning. Through all the tragedy, the benefit to the guild was obvious. They now had a clean section of land to build and expand upon. But the downside was that they were going to need to import labor. That was rough. At least there was plenty of wood around. Whatever hadn't burned right away had simply been knocked over, and this made it a simple matter to collect a few tons of trees to be cut into lumber. People in the guild with a carpenter class were ecstatic. Lumberjacks, less so. The doors in front of Joe opened and he was ushered over to sit at a large oval table. He wasn't the last to arrive, but it was pretty close. Ketan stepped into the room as soon as the final person was present and charged straight into conversation. "Hey guys, just popped over from the front lines and have a really short window to make it back before the gate spell collapses. I'll get straight to the agenda. First up, we're having a lot of issues with leadership abusing their positions. If you're suspected of doing this, there will be an investigation. If it is found that you're doing things you shouldn't be, like putting someone into the position of attention or messing with them when they aren't breaking our rules, your position is gone. No argument, no appeal. You might even get kicked from the guild." Ketan was speaking in a deep voice and trying to make eye contact with a whole table at once. "Now look around. All the people here are guild leadership. Become friends. It matters. Lastly, with Sir Barrington's permission, I was officially able to claim the entire town and about 1 square mile of land, with this building at the exact center. We need to make this place into a fortress, but first we need to get people out of Term 10 and into barracks at the minimum. There are a lot of support and logistics issues that need to be addressed, so work together to make it happen. If you have a skill set that could help us here, please use it to help us all out." Ketan was practically staring holes in Joe as he was speaking. "All right, that's all. I gotta go." Ketan ran out of the building, and the other people just sort of sat there with information overload. They started chatting, but Joe had been having a very long day and left after the 8th person introduced themselves. He was doing his best to be friendly, but celestial feces, some of these people were boring. Joe was pretty sure that at least half the staff were there as stand-ins for some corporation that was funding this guild. The other half seemed zealous about treating this purely as a game. Not really Joe's scene when he was so tired. After escaping the clutches of polite small talk for the 2nd time in one night, Joe finally made it back to the Pathfinder's hall. He was looking forward to a bed in one of the most defended places he could manage. The last time he had slept out in the open, an assassin had tried to lay a terrifying curse on him. It had failed, sure, but it had also made Joe far more wary. Just as he was closing the door behind him, someone out in the darkness screamed, "I can't log out." Silence followed this proclamation for only as long as it took other people to try logging out as well. Then the night erupted into screams and shouts, rage and fear. "Nope." Joe firmly closed the door behind him, not dealing with that right now. Bed. Most of that'll be sorted by morning anyway. Chapter 3. Nothing like a well-rested bonus to get you going in the morning. Joe stepped out of the massive egg-shaped building and looked around. There were a lot of sleepless faces around, eyes ringed with the purple and black bruises that showed up after a long and trying night. Though maybe I'll go ahead and keep that to myself. Joe had a very standard routine in the morning. Wake up, cast cleanse on himself, find coffee, and drink said coffee. His body and clothing were cleaner than if he had spent 15 minutes in the shower and he used a modern washing machine. And now he was ready for the second half of the morning ritual. Laughs. No one ever said his jokes were good before coffee, but that one came close. While walking over to the dining hall, Joe kept an eye on his fellow guild members. A good chunk of them seemed distraught, but an even larger number of them seemed hypermanic and happy with this outcome. Joe wasn't sure where the discrepancy lay. Perhaps they were simply hardcore gamers that had been chasing after this fantasy from the start. Where was the coffee? Joe got in the back of a long line and not exactly patiently waited for his chance at the anthracite ambrosia. When he finally got around to the front, he realized why this process was taking so long today, and cursed whoever had brought this tradition to Eternium. Grande half-calf double-whip toffee nut latte with an extra shot. People turned and stared at him as he screamed. But he didn't care. No! Why, you monster? In the first place, why would you get a shot of espresso and put that delicious liquid in half-calf mud? Move, you. Coffee, black, large. The server, no, the barista, smiled at him and poured a long stream of coffee into a mug for him. Can I get a name for this? Joe. Thanks, Elbow. That'll be 5 copper. The barista hadn't changed his plastered-on facial expression the entire time. Joe had to do his best not to slap him, grab the mug, and run away screaming. Here's the copper. Joe slapped the coins on the table and snatched the mug away. I can't even tell you how upset I am about this situation. New policy. Coffee is expensive to get out here, so we can't just give it away for free. Have a great day, Elbow. The barista was already back to helping other customers, and Joe could only walk stiffly while sipping his drink. Anger sipping. Okay, I can do this. This is fine. Joe laughed in a slightly too high-pitched tone. Since everyone else is out on quests and stuff, I guess I'll just go. Excuse me, Joe? A glasses-wearing man stepped toward him with a too-friendly expression on his face. The glasses had to be an affectation, as everyone had perfect eyesight here. That, or they offered some bonus, similar to Joe's scholarly spectacles. I don't think we've had a chance to meet. I am the Vice Guild leader. My name is Michael. My friends call me Mike, and I hope you will as well. Well, good morning, Mike. Joe switched his coffee mug to his left hand and shook Mike's outstretched appendage. How can I help you today? I have a few problems that I'm told you might be willing to help with, especially in light of our most recent meeting and subsequent lack of being able to log off. Mike saw the coffee in Joe's hand and smiled widely. Oh, you found our newest coffee shop. That was my idea. Did you find something that you liked? Blasphemy. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Mike frowned at Joe's whispered word, but decided to just launch into his reason for being there. I'm told that you can raise buildings very quickly, and I know that you are the one who made the Pathfinder's Hall. Can I ask what you would need from us to get a few housing developments going? Since no one can log off, we're finding that having rooms would be very beneficial. You want me to make housing? Joe tried not to crack his knuckles, a bad habit from his past life. I can create war-starting and ending structures, and you want me to magic houses into existence. Joe's flat tone wasn't lost on Mike, who gestured at the massive black marble building. I do. I know that this isn't as glorious as something like that, but this is something that may actually be more important in the short term. It'll take a week for our people to put up a house, 2 for an apartment building or barracks. But you You can do it in under a day, I'm told. We'll supply whatever you need within reason, and this is a great way to earn contribution points. Contribution points? Joe wasn't dumb. He was just as surprised by the blatant attempt to get him to do a lot of work on what was essentially credit. An IOU didn't help much when a wolf was tearing out your throat. He'd found that out firsthand. Right. Well, we took the concept from the Wolfman War, Mike jovially informed Joe. When we go on raids or clear dungeons, there will be gear and items that everyone wants. Those will go into the guild storage, and people will be able to buy that sort of thing only with contribution points. I swear, it'll be a useful currency. Will be. Joe sighed and drank his now cool coffee in one long pull. All right. Listen, Mike. There's a reason that buildings take a long time to build. What you are doing is having a bunch of people share the energy cost and potentially cutting down on the resources needed to put a building together properly. If I were to do it, I could get a building up in 10 minutes after the process got going. There is still a cost, both in mana and resources. It's a lot cheaper to just build the building. How high of a cost are we talking? Before Joe could answer, Mike held up a hand and continued. Is the cost so high that it would be worth about 100 people who just lost everything, sleeping outside? My job is morale. Even that coffee you were looking so sour over a moment ago, the intentionally insulting treatment is something familiar to a lot of people. The options they get to choose from, those make them feel less powerless in a place they just found out they can't leave. I'm telling you that if it will help the people relying on us, I'll happily foot the bill. Joe's opinion of the man in front of him just soared. Ex-military. Lieutenant Colonel, retired. Mike showed him a real smile and pushed his glasses up his nose. But you never really retire. Huh? Joe rubbed the back of his bald head. It's good to see that there are some people in upper management thinking about the low-level people. All right, sir. First thing I'm gonna need is a blueprint of whatever building you want made. I need it to be perfect, because whatever is on that blueprint is what is being built. I'll make it happen. And don't call me sir. That life is over. What's Mike smiled and shook Joe's hand again. You never really retire, though, do you? Joe grinned back at the expression on Mike's face as he repeated the words Mike had used. Plus, this makes it really easy for me to get back at you for tainting my morning coffee run. Mike growled a deep, meaningful growl that only people with military experience can make, and Joe laughed at him. All right, sir. I'm going to be occupied over at the mess hall for the next 2 hours. Don't let people interrupt me. Just have them leave the blueprints in front of me. Mess hall indeed. It's a double row of picnic tables, and you Abyss well know it. Mike nodded at him and marched off. Now that Joe knew what to look for, the military bearing was plain. Joe turned and went over to the wooden tables, having decided to work on his puzzle cube. Since Joe had 3 of the 4 stats in the second tier, it took an hour and 45 minutes for a notification to appear. Still, that was better than the 7 hours it should have taken. Characteristic point training completed. +1 to intelligence, wisdom, perception, and dexterity. These stats cannot be increased further by any means other than system rewards, study, or practice for 24 hours game time. Joe blinked away the question that the puzzle cube had given him today. Why do we have emotions? He had been caught in an odd loop there. Was the cube saying that it had emotions? He assumed that it was talking about humans. But this thing had some really non-standard questions on it. so he couldn't discount the possibility that it was using him to justify its existence. Still, the training had paid off. In front of Joe, actually tucked under his left elbow, was a small stack of papers. Blueprints. Excellent. Joe picked up the first one, took a look, and set it aside. He was going to be building a few of the larger housing complexes, like a barracks or an apartment, to maximize the housing efficiency first. Small, well-appointed houses could wait. A pot of ink, a quill, some low-grade scroll paper, and Joe's ritual reference book all appeared on the table in front of him. Joe smiled as he pulled the items directly from his codpiece of holding to his hand, without needing to make a seemingly obscene action. He already had people looking at him strangely on the regular. No need for them to think that he kept a pot of ink and a quill in his undies. Step 1. Surround a copy of the magical blueprint with the architect's fury ritual. Joe placed a scroll of paper under the blueprint after putting a thin layer of the darkest shadow he could make over the lines on the ritual template he had already drawn up. Then he used the quill to deftly make a tracing of the dark lines, finishing within about half an hour. He dropped the quill into the inkwell and sat back to let the paper dry. Oh, that's so much easier than making all this from scratch. Or wait, I'm not actually sure. Easier than coming up with a design, at least. Skill increase. Drawing. Novice 6. Go you, dirty tracer. Looks like even the drawing skill is as picky about real art as artists are. Joe snorted at the notification, deciding it was time to get back to work. This is going to be a Tier 1 building, but with this great of a blueprint, and if I add on a second spell circle, I should be able to get this to be at least a common-ranked building. Bam. After working out the spell circle on a separate piece of paper and validating it, thanks to his occultist bonus, he started the process of infusing the ritual with mana and linking the blueprint. This was always the most delicate part, but he had faith in his success, even though this was a student-ranked diagram. His copy of the blueprint appeared in the ritual circle and seemed to struggle to escape. As the mana-infused ink dried onto the paper, the entire thing shuddered slightly once more, but stabilized. Phew! It was already lunchtime, and Joe had only been able to create a single ritual diagram to create a single building. Actually, now that he thought about it, that wasn't a terrible amount of time to make something that would become a permanent fixture. He smacked himself in the face when he remembered that there was a bonus to creation speed he could have gotten from the ritual room of the Pathfinder's Hall. But instead of falling into despair, he sighed and decided lunch needed to come before his mood. Actually, his mood was likely being affected by hunger and thirst. Cleanse. Joe watched as his mana appeared on his fingers and turned into water. That water found a vein on his arm and poured in, hydrating him better than an IV could have ever hoped to do. Food next. After getting a quick bite to eat, Joe decided to do the calculations for the building before seeking out Mike again. He was muttering aloud without realizing it. Reducing the cost by a flat 50%, down another 23% from the ritual magic skill. Coalescence? Oh, another 21%. Looks like this is going to come out to about 700 mana for initial investment. Then 50 mana per second for about 30 seconds. I have, 976. That means I'll need at least one other mage on this with me. More if I want to keep my mage armor active. I wonder if... Let's see if we have a Magic Mike. Chapter 4. You want me to participate in making the building? Mike didn't even look up from the forms he was signing rapid fire, getting through a massive stack of documents in only a few minutes. Why? Multiple reasons? one of which is to allow people to see one of their top guys going out to help them directly. It's a public relations win, a morale booster. You know it would be. Joe smiled winningly, but Mike just waved his hand for the next reason. All right, the other reason I want this so much is so that you realize exactly what's going on when I pull magic out of my butt to create a building. It's really cool, but very draining. I can't do it constantly, and I want you to see why I won't do this sort of thing all the time. Also, here's a list of extra components I need beyond the building materials. Also, what are the contribution points I'll get for this? 2,000. The same amount that will be given to a logistics group that supplies raids on dungeons in the near future. We can negotiate future rates after this first building goes up. Mike took the list, looked it over, and looked up at Joe with raised brows. Why do you need some of these things? Termite spore, for instance. That'll do for the time being. Now, the odd items on the list. Lots of reasons. But that one's specifically because this area has a huge termite problem, and this'll automatically add anti-infestation protections to the building. The rest of it is the cost of building a common ranked barracks in a day from the ground up. Also, I added an extra room to each building so that they can be upgraded if we ever find better designs for them. Mike looked over the list once more, signed it into a requisition order, and handed it to one of his aides. How important is it that I participate? You join in or I won't. Joe's smile showed teeth. That'll do for the time being. Now the odd items on the list. Lots of reasons. But that one's specifically because this area has a huge termite problem. And this'll automatically add anti-infestation protections to the building. The rest of it is the cost of building a common ranked barracks in a day from the ground up. Also, I added an extra room to each building so that they can be upgraded if we ever find better designs for them. When are we doing this? As soon as you can get all the supplies in place. Joe turned toward the door. Everything else is already built into this ritual blueprint. All we need to do is power and activate it. Is it reusable? Mike leaned forward interestedly. No, since I made the ritual by using a blueprint instead of scanning an already built structure, we only get to use it once. Then I have to make the whole thing again. Also, word of warning, anyone else activating it would need to pay the full cost of all materials and mana. Joe smiled at Mike and opened the door. Let me know when you're ready for me. I'll be working on my skills over at the training grounds. Joe went over to the mid-range spell practice area and worked to familiarize himself with his newest powers. Effortless shaping, contrary to its name, required an exact picture in mind when working to make something out of darkness. It was intense mental work, but with such an insignificant drain on mana that Joe had to assume that was where the effortless portion of the skill name came from. Beyond that, getting details too close to each other tended to make them blend, which could really only be fixed by gaining skill levels. Sadly, the lack of needed mana was quickly made up for when Joe solidified the shadows into anything. He could invest 10 points of mana per skill level, and had found that larger amounts of mana would let him do more damage or stabilize the structure for longer periods of time. Right now, shadows would bleed and slowly vanish when they were exposed to bright light. Joe had found this out when he was running mana through a ritual, and one of the lines snapped. If he had been doing anything important with it, he would have been in a lot of trouble. Joe had gotten very lucky in the past, especially during the war, when his basic enchanting ritual was stuffed under a tent. That could have gone very badly. So, training, perfecting his shadowy shapes and holding them under the sun to find ways to make them last longer and hold more detail was the only thing he could think to do for training himself in this regard. Also, Solidifying the shadows required him to pour mana into the shape, and he wanted to be able to do that faster. Over the course of a few hours, and thanks to the boost from proximity to the Pathfinder's Hall, he gained a few skill levels. Skill increase, effortless darkness, shaping, apprentice 7. Boo! Did I scare you? Skill increase, solidified shadows, apprentice 7. You look scared. Skill increase, cleanse, apprentice 7. Strange that you increased 3 skills and they all became the same rank and level. Plus 1 luck. All right, I'll take it. Multiple hours of hydrating people around him upon request had also paid off, it seemed. Joe looked at the shadow skills almost greedily. They were the only legendary and mythical skills he had, and he couldn't wait to see what kind of bonuses he would gain from them as they ranked up. Joe, ready to get this over with? Mike came trotting up, a few of his aides in tow. Let's get some people housed before darkness sets in. Whoa, what happened here? The ground was torn up all over the place, and a few of the targets had brutal scarring on them. Joe looked at his handiwork and winced. He hadn't been thinking about what others would see when they watched his spells going off, or what they would think when they saw the torn-up landscape. Miss a lot, don't you? Mike commented dryly as he took a look around. He smirked and started walking away, Joe following after with a bright red face. I can see why you wanted to practice. No, I don't miss a lot. I was trying new spell effects. Joe's defensiveness caused the small group to snicker, and he realized that he was being intentionally baited. Laugh it up, big guy. Mike's lips twitched, but Joe couldn't see it happening. By the time they got to a cleared lot, he had his face under control once again. Here we are. All of the normal material needed for building this barracks are over here, and here are the items you requested. Great. Joe grabbed the bag, looking through it and inspecting the quality of each of the items in it. All right. Good. Yeah, we should be all set. Let me place this, Mim. How do you want the building oriented? Lengthwise, like this, one of the aides spoke up, gesturing with his hands, with the doors placed here and here. Right. Joe took a deep breath at the order that was inconsistent with the blueprint they had already agreed upon. He took another, just so that he didn't say anything he would regret. Hey, Mike, interesting issue here. You wanted the doors shifted around to be different than what was on the blueprint. It was more of a last-minute judgment call. The aide waved his hands flippantly. It isn't that important if you can't do it. Good, because it isn't happening, Joe responded bluntly, shocking the aide into red-faced anger. I told you, Mike, whatever's on the blueprint is what is made. There are no alterations that I can make right now, unless you want to wait until tomorrow. I would need to make this ritual diagram from scratch, from blueprints that are correct, and that took me, about 5-ish hours today. As he mentioned, it wasn't that important. Mike stared at the now wilting aide. Frankly, I'm not sure why it came up. Because you're trying to test me, Mike. Joe sighed and cracked his neck. Stupid power games and attempts to mess with me to see how far you can push me. Standard military fare, and it doesn't bother me much. But it does bother me a little. Add on 25% of the contribution points we agreed on, or I'm out. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The group around him went quiet at the direct challenge to Mike. The man in question sighed and nodded. You drive a hard bargain, Joe. It's okay, Mike. You could triple what I'm earning. The currency's worthless right now. Joe didn't break eye contact. So was Bitcoin a decade ago, Mike grumbled half-heartedly. You got it, Joe. My bad. Look, it's just something pretty deeply ingrained in me. I've had my fill of military, Mike. As much as I respect all the people in it, my time there is done, and I'm very happy with that arrangement. Joe looked at the aides and made a motion at the edges of the property. Can someone grab a stick and rough out where the building should be going? Gonna have to destroy it by hand if we get it wrong, and I don't know if a lot of people will be on board for that. When all the preparations were complete and a drop of blood from both of them had been added to the silver focus chalice, Joe looked over at Mike and smiled darkly. Ready? Here we go. With those words, the Ritual architect poured mana into the ritual blueprint he had created, and a holographic double ring expanded away from the men and eclipsed the entire lot. In structuram pulchra placent. The two men running the ritual were lifted off their feet as wood, nails, and pipes began flying toward them and assembling themselves into barracks form. The ritual turned sideways, and as it passed over the area, it acted like a printer that left behind completed buildings. A massive 3D printer. Mike got a beautiful view of the entire process and really seemed to be enjoying himself. Then Joe got down to 20% of his mana, and the draw switched over to the Vice Guild leader. "Son of a..." Mike exclaimed in sudden shock. Joe chuckled. His body was literally designed to move around massive flows of power like this, but he didn't need to let other people know that. Let them think that he got mana sick like they did, and his work would be even more respected. Also, less requested if he made the person bothering him participate. The ritual drained Mike down to 10 mana before switching back to Joe. The Ritual architect had been able to regenerate 280 mana over the intervening 14 seconds. That, coupled with the almost 200 mana he had remaining from the first round, afforded him another 10 seconds of mana input before it switched back to Mike. The man lasted 3 seconds, then the drain was back to Joe, but luckily the ritual only lasted another second before finishing. Then the diagram burst into intense blue flames and vanished. They settled on the ground, both heaving great gulps of air and staring at the bright sky. Within a few moments they were able to sit up and look at the building they had just erected. Mike was the first to speak. "It looks excellent. I can see why you would attach a high price for your work, though. I'd get a carpenter to look at it, but it should be perfectly safe for people to sleep in there tonight," Joe informed the Vice Guild leader. "No class experience gained for buildings common ranked or below." "Good show." Mike looked at the building once more. He squinted and pointed up. "No shingles on the roof?" "Well, Mike." Joe stood up, brushed off his robe of liquid darkness, and shrugged. "No shingles on the blueprint. Chapter 5. We're back, Joe?" Alexis ran over to Joe as he was leaving breakfast. Joe's bad mood over being interrupted halfway through his daily characteristic score training vanished like fog on a sunny day. "Alexis." Joe opened his arms and his teammate gave him a hug. "It's so good to see you. How was your trip?" "Pretty great." Alexis smiled even as her eyes went flat. "We were able to improve our skills a lot, gain some good experience, and even prevent a few war crimes from occurring." "War crimes?" Joe almost didn't want to know. As in, the Wolfmen are sentient or close enough to it that slaughtering innocents is a really bad thing, she quietly informed him, even as she pulled him along to see the others in the party. Thanks to Bart keeping people calm and Poppy stabbing a few of the most vicious people in the face, we stopped a lot of things that shouldn't have even been considered. "That's good. I'm proud of you guys," Joe told the three as the other two came into view. "When you went off to finish off that race, I was really worried that you would do some things you might eventually regret. I'm glad to be proven wrong." Oh, not with my pretty lass keeping us in line, Bart called over, causing Alexis to simultaneously roll her eyes and blush. It's good to see you, Joe. Even better to be seen, Joe smirked at the trio. Hi, Poppy. Ah, our fearless leader. Poppy swept off his oversized feathered hat and sketched a bow. How it warms my heart to be in your presence once more. Right. Joe snorted and slapped the man on the shoulder. All we need now is Jackson, and we'll be back to full strength. I'd like to contend that we are at full strength whenever I am here. Poppy sniffed at the air haughtily. I'd also... Joe splashed the duelist in the face with a cleanse spell, and then decided to make the most of it when he realized that the three of them actually stunk pretty badly. Water spun out from Joe and washed over the three, cleaning them and their clothes at the same time. There we go. You guys should be losing that debuff right about now. Much better. Poppy spat to the side. Hey, thanks, but a bit of warning, yeah. The black water is cold. Any plans for the day? Joe looked around at the others and got shrugs in response. Actually, weren't you all supposed to be gone for a few more days? Yeah, but when no one could log out, food started vanishing way faster than we had plotted for. Not only that, Alexis took a swig of water from her canteen. Morale was pretty low at that point. We figured good enough and got moving back here. Oh, well, good. Joe smiled around, but his happy look slowly faded. I unfortunately seem to have been nerfed during our time apart. What do you mean? Bart questioned with a furrowed brow. You doing all right? Yeah, but I lost my direct connection to my deity. Joe sighed softly. Gonna need to do a lot of work to restore him, and I really need to test out my current combat ability. We got a quest about cleaning out some caverns nearby that might connect to a deeper level of those mines we collapsed, Poppy offered quickly. It looked fun, what with the total lack of information available in a dark, cramped space. Sounds just about perfect. You all okay to get going? Joe looked around, and everyone nodded eagerly. He really hoped that they were eager to fight and get back together, not to see how weak he was. They started walking toward the gates, and Joe was just about to ask a question when he saw someone familiar. Jackson, there you are, Joe called happily. He had been the most concerned about Jackson. The man had a tendency to break people accidentally, or start fights accidentally, or get warrants for his arrest accidentally. Joe had been worried. Everyone just got back a short while ago. I was hoping that we could get up to date on our adventures. What do you think? Excuse me, get out of the way. A pompous man Joe recognized from the late-night meeting a few days ago seemed to be nearly hyperventilating over Joe interrupting him, his fists clenched and pale as he continued shouting at Jackson. We told you what would happen if you came back, and you're... Joe stepped closer to Jackson, still chatting happily to bait the youth into doing something stupid. The young leader seemed absolutely shocked that Joe had done so, and decided to play right into Joe's hands. Are you not in the guild? I said get out of the way. Right, that's enough. I'm Joe. Who are you? Joe turned to the other man and suddenly pulled in shadows at strategic locations on his body. This, combined with leaking his mana, had the interesting effect of creating a seemingly powerful aura of magic that stifled those around him, and adding a point or three of mana to slightly solidify the shadows, created an actual physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. I don't actually care. Leave us alone. Joe turned back to Jackson, suddenly all smiles again. Jackson, What happened to you? What are you wearing?" "Oh, it's been an interesting few days," Jackson cheerfully stated, giving Joe an unwanted hug that left a thin film of blood and sweat behind. The bald man gave a weak smile, trying not to gag as he cast Cleanse on Jackson and himself. A disk of water traveled up and down their bodies, followed by the woman with Jackson as an afterthought. "Ah, I've missed your tricks. Oh, before I go too far, I need to feed my hands a treat. Been too busy the last few days to really do so." "Feed your hands." Bart smiled uncomfortably. "I feel like you have an interesting story for me to tell." "One moment." Jackson ignored the others, including the pompous man's group, who were still standing awkwardly near them. A box appeared in Jackson's hands, from which he pulled a brick of meat. With a strange distortion, Jackson's hands shifted into lizard-like heads and began tearing into the meat. The people in the area all shouted, flinched, or took a step backward, with two notable exceptions: the woman with Jackson, as she appeared used to this, and Joe, who took a step closer, with wonder filling his eyes. As the hands finished their snack, Jackson held them aloft so they could roar their joy into the sky. "Are those T-Rex head hands?" Jackson cheerfully stated, pulling the now placid creatures closer to his body. "They are a skill called living weapons." Rex head hands. Joe's eyes were burning with excitement, and as the other group took the chance to escape the situation, Joe wanted nothing more than to grab the miniature beasts and study them. "Long name. If they always come out together, could we call them something else?" Jackson smiled happily. Now here was a man who appreciated the finer things in life. "Sure, Joe. What did you have in mind?" "How about Rexus?" "Interesting. Rexus." Jackson rolled the word around in his mouth for a moment. Rex, as in king, which is where T-Rex comes from in the first place. Rexus as a whole, though, that means a mature, self-possessed, and a responsible nature. Absolutely perfect, Joe. That describes me perfectly. Glad to hear it, man. Joe studied the head hands intently until they shifted back into regular hands. Laughs. "Oh, that might have been the coolest skill I've seen the entire time I've been here. I want some." "We can talk about it later. We're in a cornfield," Jackson stated with a cautious smile. When there was no reaction, he snorted and looked around. "Ears everywhere? Come on. That expression can't be that outdated." "Oh, yes, it can, Jackson." The woman standing next to Jackson chimed in with a sigh. "Hi, everyone. I'm Jess." Since I highly doubt Jackson was going to introduce me, he forgot I was traveling with him a few times over the last week. I've missed you, Jackson." Poppy snickered, reaching out a hand to the lady. "Very nice to meet you, Jess. I'm Poppy, the leader of this team." Alexis slapped his hand out of the air as Jess reached out. "He most certainly is not. Joe here is team leader. I'm Alexis, the second in command." "Hi there. I feel like I've heard enough about you that we'll be able to skip all the awkwardness," Jess exclaimed happily. Her smile cracked when Jackson spoke up. "From who?" "I don't think I've talked about them to you at all." The low-charisma chiropractor waited impatiently for a response. "Was it those PvP assassins you used to hang out with? They don't seem like the sort of people to give happy information very often." "Jackson, I was going to make a joke where I said, not really. Jackson is insane and can't hold a real conversation, but you are just the worst." Jess turned and tried to stab Jackson with an extra shiny dagger that had appeared in her hand. The man dodged easily and smiled. "Thank you, Jess. I was wondering how you planned to keep me battle-ready while we're in a safe area. but I should have known you had something planned." Joe watched them go back and forth a few more times, but then he stepped in. "All right. Well, we're going to go attack a subterranean quest area right now. Are you interested in coming along?" "I'd love to, but I am currently starving and dehydrated. Near death, actually," Jackson replied matter-of-factly. "I could really go for a—" Joe had already set up an IV using cleanse, and the lines on Jackson's face started to ease. Guessing that Jess was likely in a similar situation, Joe set a spell on her as well. Now used to Joe's abilities, thanks to the nice-to-meet-you-have-a-cold shower, she dodged the spell and slashed the water out of the air, then glared at Joe with dangerous eyes. "Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. It's a buff that gets you hydrated. I'm a healer. Sometimes I forget that not everyone knows who I am." "Got it." Jess slowly spoke the words, then watched Jackson for a moment as more and more water flowed into him. When his face didn't change away from cheerful and he didn't attack the healer, she nodded at Joe. "All right. That could really be helpful, if you wouldn't mind." "Not at all." Water wrapped up her arm in an instant and began flowing into her veins. She relaxed as the subtle debuffs began vanishing. "Let's get you guys some food, and then would you like to join us, Jackson?" "But of course." Jackson smiled and started walking toward the dining area. "Also, Jess here would like to join us as a strategist. Crawling through dark places seems to be what she's interested in." Jess had an aggrieved expression on her face, and she ran her hands through her hair before blowing out a breath. "Yeah, that wasn't the introduction that I'd been hoping for, but it'll have to do. I'm Jess. I'm an aspiring strategist and team logistics manager. I'm here hoping for a job and a guild invite." "You spent the last week with Jackson?" Alexis narrowed her eyes at the woman. "How many times did you try to kill him?" Jess looked stricken. Being honest? About 6. "Not even once a day?" Alexis clapped and smiled. "She has really good self-control, Joe. I say we take her." Joe looked at Jess in a new light, a few cogs in his brain settling into place. "All right, Jess, we don't have a position on the squad per se, but I think that we could find a great use for your talents. I don't know what class you have, but if you want a different one more specialized for what you really want to do. Have you heard of the Pathfinder's Hall?" Jess looked up at the black egg-shaped building that Joe was gesturing at. "What is that used for?" Joe just smiled at her, Chapter 6 after a trip, to get rid of the near-starvation debuffs the two had returned with. Joe took Jess through the Pathfinder's Hall and found her a class more suited to her liking. The guild clerks running the place had insisted that they pay the fee for a non-guild member using the building services, which had exasperated Joe to no end. He owned this place. He calmed down after he realized that they were being more than fair. After all, it was Joe who had worked with the guild to find a good middle ground between ownership and management. Jess went into one of the stalls and came out a handful of minutes later, her face set and contemplative. The Pathfinder's Hall didn't give you a class. It only showed the way along paths that had already been tread by someone else. From the look on Jess's face, the path she had chosen required hard work, but was manageable. "We'll get you all set up with the guild after we've been able to work together for a while. Sound good?" Joe's question was mostly rhetorical, as he had no intention of bringing her in without testing her capabilities himself. "It does." Jess sighed and ran her hand through her hair with a flick of her wrist. "Not being able to log out has definitely changed my reasons for doing what I'm doing. But it doesn't change the fact that I need to want to be doing what I do. Does that make sense?" "If I think about it a little, yes. At face value, it seems all over the place. Joe bluntly replied, getting a grin from her. "Oh, have you seen the news?" Jess met Joe's eyes with a dark look. "Looks like we aren't here because of a glitch or anything like that. This is a new reality, apparently. Somewhere in this place, President Musk is hanging out and walking among us. Showed it on live television." Joe's steps faltered. "So, now we have proof that the beings in here aren't digital constructs. They are for sure real." "What is real?" Jess flippantly turned the question back on him. "I guess it's best to treat everything like an actual living being, if that's what you're asking." Joe nodded as they walked along, deep in thought. They found the rest of the team waiting for them, and Jess waved and headed off to find a place to get some sleep. Without needing to tell the others, the group got moving along the path. "Hey, someone actually share the quest with me?" "Oh, me as well, thank you." Jackson chimed in. Quest gained. Salty sensations. The Wanderers Guild has been surveying the area in an attempt to find natural resources to exploit. One of these locations is a salt mine that may connect to a previously demolished ore mine. Search the area. Defeat any creatures inhabiting the salt mine. Bonus objective. Find a way to access the ore mine from the salt mine. Reward. Based upon work completed. Failure. This quest is failed if abandoned or completed by another group first. Got it. Thanks. Joe called over to Poppy, who removed his hat with a flourish and bowed. Shall we get going? Anyone need anything before we go? You planning to go out and about with only what you're wearing right now? Alexis looked critically at what Joe had equipped. Of course, she could only see his robe and staff, but that highlighted a point that Joe had been avoiding for quite a while. He was very under-equipped. In fact, he took a look at what he was wearing in his status screen to see the effects of the gear he had on. Robe of liquid darkness. Rare. Wearing this robe makes you look a bit wet, but increases the power of dark affinity magic by 10%. Shoes and socks. Reduces the penalty for walking over sharp objects. Also keeps feet dry for up to 3 hours from standard wear. Mystic Theurge Staff. Ironwood. Special. Dual class. Mystic Theurges place no boundaries on their magical abilities and find no irreconcilable paradox in devotion to the arcane as well as the divine. This staff helps to unite their power. Effect. Adds 10 to 20 blunt damage on strike. Negative 12% cast time when casting either cleric or mage spells. Halves penalty for using cross-class, mage or cleric skills. Note this is a two-handed item, and only one spell may be cast at a time using it. Spatial Codpiece. Legendary. This functional piece of armor also serves a greater purpose. It is able to store 30 cubic meters worth of items. Goods must come within 2 inches of the armor to be stored, but can be retrieved directly onto the body or into the hand, as long as the codpiece is touching your skin. Adds 5 points to overall armor class and prevents blows from damaging your genitals entirely. Let's just say your junk is safely stored. Joe loved the descriptions of his useful items. But, yeah, he had equipment slots for underwear, shirts, pants, belts, robes, shoes, and socks. On top of the regular clothing, he could have armor, and he had dozens of possibilities for accessories, even if he wouldn't use some of them, such as nose piercings. When he looked at his current choices critically, he was grossly underdressed and, frankly, kind of gross. Going commando wasn't supposed to be a valid option, but he had been able to heal any chafing easily. No, he couldn't think of the convenience of his mostly nude self. Wait, He had been lifted into the air a lot recently. Shake the thought off. Shake it off. There had to be gear out there that could get his abilities boosted, or protect him better than he could manage currently. Joe pulled a nasty expression and mumbled, "I'll gear up when we get back, all right?" Alexis narrowed her eyes further, then stuck her tongue out at him. "Fine, but if you need help shopping, we can go together." Jackson clapped his hands in delight, and Poppy snapped his mouth closed right before he offered to show Joe around the city shopping area. "It'll be fun. The warrant for my arrest just timed out, so we can go have a great time." "Yeah, you can go with Jackson." Alexis heartlessly laughed. There were chuckles all around, except for an excited squeal from Jackson. They chatted for a bit as they traveled through what was left of the woods, and felt nice and caught up after only the 40-minute walk to the quest location. "Is it just me, or did that look like just a hole in the ground?" Bard pointed at the entrance to the salt mine, which was certainly just a fissure in an otherwise rocky area. "I feel that Poppy should go first." "Wait, what? Why?" Poppy whirled around with the question on his lips so quickly that he nearly lost his hat. "You know the poker you've got?" Bard mimicked, stabbing straight forward. "No wind-up needed. You get me?" Poppy tried to argue, but the words kept failing to come out of his mouth. "Fine. You actually made sense, lazy ragamuffin. Scoundrel." Joe had been about to offer going first when he remembered that he was much more on par with a standard mage these days. With that thought in mind, he dumped 900 points of mana into his exquisite shell. Breathing heavily, he looked at his mana bar as it slowly refilled and stopped at 886, 90 points having been reserved for the upkeep of his protection. Ugh, man, that hurts the ego. The group walked single file into the darkness, the route worn down from use over time, though the footprints they left in the dust were showing that no one had been here for quite some time. Poppy cleared his throat, and the whole group went on high alert. So how do they know that this was a salt mine? It could have been anything or nothing. "The mayor, Sir Barrington," Joe offered uncertainly. "He's been here a long time, and I think he would know a bunch of the resources in the area, even if he hadn't been able to produce enough manpower to get at them." "Sounds about right to me," Alexis offered. Then the group lapsed into silence once more as they got deep enough underground that it became hard to see. They pulled out various light sources, mostly torches, though Poppy activated a gem-like object on his hat that created a flashlight effect wherever his hat pointed. "Look at that. Yet another reason you should be up front," Bard proudly exclaimed, getting a dirty look from Poppy in return, though the flamboyant duelist didn't say anything in reply. They walked for a few more minutes before the group all flinched at the same time, a sign that all of them had gotten a system message. "You have entered a level 5 natural dungeon, the final resting place of the legends of the League. This is one of the saltiest known places that can be found in the 7 worlds. Keep an eye out for the naturally occurring resources, as well as the protectors. This dungeon will only remain until it is cleared, after which point the area can be claimed for incorporation into a guild or business venture." "Interesting," Joe commented after reading through the entire message. "This place shouldn't be all that challenging for us then." "Oh, hey, I have a progress bar." "What? What does it say?" Alexis stepped closer, as if she would be able to read the information herself. "Just 0 out of question mark right now," Joe responded after double-checking. "I guess this is my Dungeoneer title, activating. Not giving a ton of information, though." Alexis stepped away, following after the rest of the group as they continued. "If there isn't a point in keeping the title, at least you know which one to remove when you earn a better one." Joe frowned. So far, he had never seen a title that had such little effect, and he resolved to keep an eye on it. As they walked, he gained his answer. Another progress bar appeared showing an area explored title. Got a fresh one. Looks like we've explored 2.3% of this place already. Now we're talking, Poppy called back. Everything seems a little easier when you know for sure how much you have left to do. Then a third bar appeared, and Joe stared at it. No information appeared, and it stayed in place near the wall as they walked. Odd. A new bar appeared, but I think it's connected to the wall. Let's take a look. They walked closer, but nothing about the wall seemed to explain the attached bar. Joe poked at the spot, and it exploded outward in a shower of salt. Gah! Nays. A salty blade bounced off Joe's exquisite shell, taking a few dozen points of its durability away due to what had most likely been a critical hit. There was a monster in front of Joe, something that looked like a centaur with blades where its human hands should be. It had the lower body of a horse, the torso of a man, but the head of a horse again. Also, as far as Joe could tell, it was entirely made of salt. An arrow slammed into the creature's chest, blowing a massive hole through the beast. It didn't seem to care, and swung at Joe just as Jackson lashed out and obliterated the top half of its body, then shook it to clear off the accumulated salt. Nasty little things. Does-a-ki-ta-ti mean anything to you guys? They're only worth 10 experience, just so you know. I bet that any wound they give you is coated in salt, Alexis commented, getting a nod from Jackson as he shook out his hand. Looks painful. Joe, want to wash that off for him? Sure thing. Joe hadn't even thought of that. This was just one more reason he wanted to give Alexis the reins of leadership. He would have to get her alone and talk about it. A quick cleanse got rid of the salt, and Jackson instantly looked relieved. Looks like what I was seeing on the wall was that thing's health bar. Alexis gave Joe a thumbs up. I didn't see anything, so I think we found the usefulness of that little title. Looks like you're the scout. Chapter 7. Whoosh. The sound of a huge creature devolving into a pile of salt was more fun to hear than Joe would ever admit to the general populace. He would still tell them that it was fun, but he wanted to keep this level of enjoyment confined to himself and the people in the know. He looked around with a wide smile on his face, only finding a matching expression on Jackson's face. They high-fived and scooped the newly formed salt pile into a bag. Candy, that. Bard nodded at the resource they were collecting. Think of how many more people would be miners if that were the norm for collecting the goods. No kidding, Poppy agreed easily. If I got to fight a metal contraption and it fell apart into bars of ore, I'd do that for sure. Fighting ability and nearly guaranteed profit. Jackson licked his fingers with a grin. Deadly and delicious. Excellent combination. Like Lexus here. Bard drew a chuckle from the group as he pulled the aromatic artificer in for a kiss. When his words registered, Alexis punched him in the arm hard enough that he rubbed at the spot, even while laughing. Joe felt some salt raining on him, and he shouted even as he started to move. From above! A pillar of salt crashed down where the group had stood only a few moments before, showering them in sharp particles, even though they had avoided the main object. The group stood up, staring at the large cylinder in annoyance. Joe started to get closer when his eyes widened and he fell back. It has a health bar. The others scrambled further away as the edges of the pillar dropped to the sides like a discarded banana peel. They hit the ground hard enough to fall to chunks, and an enormous minotaur made entirely of salt took a step out of the object it had been entombed within. It bellowed at them, a dry, particle-laden shout. The sharp salt pinged off Joe's shielding, knocking off 4 points of durability. Poppy was the first to react, his rapier twirling outward and punching a perfectly round but small hole in the creature's side. Bard, I think this guy is designed for you to hit. The axe-wielding man stomped forward and swung horizontally at the Minotaur, even as it sent a fist at Poppy. The axe hit and scored a deep line, even breaking apart the arm in multiple places. An arrow struck one of the fissures, breaking off the arm entirely and causing the Minotaur to stumble. Jackson took that chance to slam a fist into the off-balance monster's knee, taking it down to the ground. As it landed, cracks ran along the entirety of the salty creature, and a follow-up punch caused the entire thing to break apart into coarse salt. Why was that so easy? Joe wondered out loud as he walked over to help with the salt collection. That seemed like it should have been one of the stronger monsters in the entire cave. Look at your combat logs, Joe, Poppy called out. Pretty obvious when you look at it objectively. Joe pulled open the screen and took a look. Experience, 18. Salta Tower times 1. Oh, that was only worth 18 experience? Joe paused a moment and thought over that again. If this is a level 5 dungeon, that means we are really over-leveled then. I feel like that is actually a generous amount of experience. I bet it is, because they are ambush creatures. Poppy offered before anyone else could react. Since they should be harder to detect, as well as causing overly painful wounds, I bet the experience reward is balanced. We are a solid 10 levels above them, right? Joe shrugged helplessly. That must be it. Also, we've explored 23% of this place. If we can clear it out, I say we claim it and get the guild to run it for us. Works for me. Jackson poked at the fallen body before shaking his head. No bones in these beasts? Oh well, I suppose that would have been too much to ask for. The group continued making their way through the dungeon, soon encountering small groups of the creatures they had fought until this point. There was one nerve-wracking moment at just about the 75% explored mark, where 7 pillars of salt rained down and released a small herd of saltators. But having found that their weakness was simply blunt force trauma, well, that was enough for the group to easily dispatch the monsters. The party continued onward, dedicated to clearing this place out on the first try. They got to the deepest passage of the cave system, finding that the naturally pink walls were becoming ornamented and extravagantly carved. Joe consulted his progress meter and stopped the others. Hey guys, I'm betting that we're closing in on the boss of this dungeon, and I want to make sure we're all prepared to go in there. Anyone need food, water, or healing? Skill increased. Speech, novice. 3. Sometimes asking the right questions matters. Feeling good over here, Joe? Jackson held his hands straight out in front of him and jogged in place, hitting his palms with his knees as he bounced. Let's go get 'em. The group walked around the last bend and came in sight of the dungeon bosses. 2 people made entirely of salt were waiting for them. The first was a huge humanoid that, were he not made of pink salt, looked like he had just stepped out of a bodybuilder magazine. The other was a thin man that looked at them hungrily and licked his dry lips, revealing needle-sharp canines. "Holes, it seems that we have visitors," the thin man mentioned to the huge one. "Indeed it does, Terry," the giant replied happily. "I was just mentioning how bored I was yesterday." "Boss, we haven't moved in over a decade," Terry commented sharply. "Let's just eat them and store the leftovers." Salted meat. Oas seemed to be trying to drool, but as he had no liquid in his body, this was difficult to do. It was the thought that counted. "I think they're trying to intimidate us." Alexis leaned toward the others, who shrugged nonchalantly. Yeah, right there with you guys. Let's collect our salt and get back to the guild. Os glared at her, then charged across the room with a bellow of, "Mate, Yabi." Alexis lifted her bow and fired just as the huge man twisted his charge and swung a blocky fist at Poppy, catching the duelist off guard. The fist slammed into his face, sending the human to the floor as blood poured from multiple lacerations and a flattened nose. "Poppy," Joe called, watching the man bounce off the floor. Bard stepped in, his axes scoring deep lines on the salty arms of Os. Joe tossed a mend spell at Poppy, the water connecting and fixing the broken nose and fractured cheekbones. Still, the fighter didn't stir, and Joe realized that there must be an internal damage debuff. The other boss, Terry, jumped into the air and somehow morphed into a giant bat that swooped down at Jackson. If Joe hadn't been convinced before that the man was a vampire, he was now. Jackson crouched and deflected the attack, sending his elbow into what was normally a nerve cluster. The strike dealt damage, but as the boss was entirely salt, there were no nerves to properly target. Bard swung his axes again, but Os clapped his hands and caught one of them between his palms, while the other scored a deep line on his arm. Bard stumbled, his momentum thrown off by the unexpected maneuver. Os took the opportunity to backhand the Scald, sending him flying with wounds on his face and neck that made falling into a grinder look pleasant. The huge salt man was essentially a massive block of sandpaper, able to turn casual swipes into deep gouges. Joe sent a globe of water at Bard, channeling mana into the spell to make it stay connected. This created a beautiful laminar flow between them, which was interrupted by Terry flying at Alexis through the unexpected obstacle and screaming. A red notification appeared in Joe's vision, showing that it was important enough to pass through his notification settings. Critical, critical. Terry takes 4 times damage, 2 times from water, 2 times from holy attribute. Damage dealt, 620. Holy moly, Joe whispered as Terry tried to get up. The boss monster was struggling mightily, but his body was melting. Alexis pointed her crossbow and launched a bolt that took his head. The salty vampire fell into a puddle of goop, defeated in an instant. "No, Terry!" Os turned and charged at Alexis, but Joe already understood his role in this play, targeting the giant salt man and pouring water into him. Instead of healing the giant, the water caused him to start melting, slowing him considerably. He didn't take 4 times damage, but 3 or 10 water damage a second was enough to bring him down after only a few moments. Experience, 110 Assault and Bat Terry. You have defeated 2 area bosses in one fell swoop. Too bad you out-leveled them so badly, else you would have gotten a great reward. Still, you fought against painful wounds. Constitution +1. Quest complete. Salty sensations. The Legends of League mines have been opened for capture by a guild or business venture. Calculating reward, 100% cleared by group. Area level greatly exceeded. Reward. Common class. Item box. Experience gained, 200. Not bad. All told, Joe had gained 533 experience during their time in the mines. He stopped himself from digging into his stat sheet too far, knowing that his team needed his help. First off, he went over to Poppy and cast a cleanse on him, focusing on his head. Joe grimaced as his mana began to plummet, growing more concerned by the second. He had never seen a debuff this severe, where it took nearly 700 mana to cure. Status ailment cured, brain damage, bleeding brain, skill increased, mend, Student 3. Finding new ways for the main branch of healing to be used results in great rewards. Skill increased. Cleanse. Apprentice. 9. You are almost great at this. Keep it up. Woof. That explained it. Seemed that Poppy was almost on his way to respawn. Yikes. His mending skill had likely been added into the attempt at healing the damage, but as it was still considered a status ailment, he had been able to fix the damage even without the proper knowledge of how to do so. Lucky. Poppy hopped to his feet and looked around. And once more, Joe was reminded that this was a game. No matter how much it was all of their reality. Ugh. I got penalized real hard there for not even attempting to block. I cannot believe he got the jump on me like that. A perfect critical, and I just stood there and took it to the face. Phrasing, Alexis muttered, making Bard giggle. Joe winced. The rugged scald, giggling, was not in line with his mental image of the rugged Scottish guy. No worries, Pops. We got them. You had brain damage, just so you know, Joe mentioned casually. Everything okay up there now? Poppy paused and looked at his status sheet. Yeah, all set. Good. Joe checked their statuses and looked at the now empty salt mine. Shall we head back to the guild then? Chapter 8. Welcome back, team. Jessamine waved at the group as they walked into the town. Population center was a better term, as only the Pathfinder's Hall, Guild Hall, and buildings made after the explosion were currently standing. I took the liberty of joining the guild using Joe's add one person to the guild no questions asked ability as a party leader. Excuse me? Joe stopped short, his face thunderous and becoming red. How did you even? You had no right to. Jess hurried to explain her other activities. Also, Joe, yes, I managed to file all the missing paperwork that the guild had been waiting on. I hope you all don't mind, but I signed the tax forms for you and got all the fines for non-payment taken care of with the explanation of the war. So all of you got all the back pay you'd been waiting on, a nice bonus from an award Joe recommended you all for, and have a few offered quests pulled up for y'all to look at. Joe waited a moment, gauging the proper reaction to this situation, and stepped close to her. Never use my authority in the future for something I don't actually agree to. And where would you like your pay and a very large starting bonus to go? Sorry, I just... Wait. Jess smiled at him, and Joe allowed his expression to soften into a smile as well. Nice. Well, you'll never have to worry about standard paperwork again. For that alone, your bonus is getting larger, Joe promised as they all started walking again. What do you have for us in the way of quests? Oh, about that. Tin wanted you to come and meet with him, like now. Jess pulled out a few other notes and carefully stacked one on top. I'm pretty sure that he wants you to work on this one. Reading the quest, Joe shook his head and grunted. The guild was looking for a way to rebuild the town, but the trouble was that they were paying for the work with contribution points. I'm betting that they aren't getting many takers, are they? All right. Let's go see Aten. This should be a trip. Hey team, if he tries to guilt us into doing work for free or reduced cost, what do we answer with? Alexis answered after a long moment of awkward silence. I think the answer you're looking for is no. Are you trying to get us to chant or something? Forget it. Why is everyone so against chanting? Joe rolled his eyes and continued skipping along at a walking pace. When they got near the new guild building, Joe smirked as he saw a team of people on the roof adding shingles to the structure. Should have put those on the blueprint. They walked to a large room people were running into and out of at speed. They entered with papers, left with papers, and all of them had a harried look on their face. Joe nearly got trampled twice. and only a timely intervention by Poppy kept him from being knocked over. When they finally got through the door, they all felt out of place in the organized chaos of the workspace. Mike, the Vice Guild leader, was standing and orchestrating movement through the area. This was vastly different from a typical or conventional office, mainly due to things needing to be physical copies with a personal signature. When Aten saw Joe, he called for a cessation of activities, and a line instantly began to form at the door. Aten waved them forward right away, near panic on his face. Conversation as short as possible. Huge, unfortunate issues. Ardenia's getting swamped by new people joining the world, and there are already starting to be massive issues with any supply orders at all. Thanks to your advice on the matter, we had started buying up all the rare resources that we thought we would need, but I'm sorry to say that abyssal economists convinced our buyers to skimp, not really thinking that there would be supply issues for a long time. Now we're missing a bunch of basic supplies, Joe guessed, getting a nod in reply. What are we looking at here? Food? Building material? Yes, was the only answer. We have all sorts of rare junk that people will need for advanced gear, but there aren't enough basics to even sustain our own people for 2 weeks without rationing. So I wanted to offer a quest to our biggest problem solvers. Aten made a gesture, and a notification appeared in front of Joe and his entire team. Guildquest offered, feed the people. With a massive influx of travelers and even more on the way, there isn't enough to go around. Find a way to sustain a population of at least 10,000 people and put it in place. Reward, guild contribution points. Accept? Yes? No? Nope. Joe waved away the message and shook his head. There is no way that I'm taking 5 people on a trip to who knows where looking for what. Trade routes? Items? There isn't even a set. What would I be looking for? And contribution points as a reward? So find a way to feed 10,000 people in return for something with no value or quantification. Why don't we just find a way into the next area? The next area is still locked off, and I have it on good authority that we will be far too weak for that place. Aten's words brought a vision of a goblin swinging a club at him into Joe's mind. Frankly, Joe, we need to get this in place, and everyone else is still working out how to deal with their own issues. We need sustainable resources. Not everyone is taking being trapped here as well as you are. Do you really want our whole guild to starve to death over and over? Everyone is needed for their own tasks, and I think that this is something you are suited to doing. Nope. I'm calling bull on this. I also have a clause in our contract that lets me refuse to do something that I think is unfair, and you know it. That's why we have this guilt trip going on. Make it worth our while. Aten, give us details, a specific goal, and currency that matters. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep doing our own thing and rocking it. Grabbed a salt mine, by the way. One of those sustainable resource centers that the guild needs, and we'd be happy to hand it over to the guild for a cut of the proceeds. Aten narrowed his eyes. I'll double the contribution points for this quest, and I can give you 2% of whatever we get out of the salt mine. We need to supply all the people for the work, and we still need to make a profit. Yes to the salt mine, still no to the quest. Joe returned instantly. Double the points? Multiplying 2 by 0 is still 0. It doesn't even list how many points are offered, just contribution points. Aten rolled his eyes and seemed to be typing at thin air. There. 10,000 contribution points for the quest. So 20,000 when you double the fictitious currency. Joe innocently eased. Aten ground his teeth and growled. I suppose that is what it will come out to, yes. Then still no. unless you have something that shows what the points are worth, things that I could buy with them, Joe demanded on behalf of his group. Are you sure you want to play it this way, Joe? Aten narrowed his eyes. Tell you what, Aten. Joe held his hands out to his sides. I'll give you 20,000 Joe points if you build me a mansion and fill it with beautiful artwork. Aten cocked his head and blinked. What's the ratio of Joe points to contribution points? The same ratio as leprechauns to unicorn poop, Joe returned serenely. If you want work done, you need to offer something real in return. We all have our own game we want to play, Aten. Show me what these points are worth, and we'll talk. All right, Joe, I guess it's time to bring in the big guns. Aten made a motion, and a small section of the room was unveiled. Joe paled and whirled on the guild leader. You brought my mother here? Joe. His mother stood up and shook her head. I thought I raised you better than this. You have a chance to keep a lot of people from starving, and you should be jumping on the chance, even if you won't get anything worthwhile out of the guild. Mom, I thought I was, Joe tried to defend himself, but a hand in the air made him stop speaking right away. Let me finish. His mom turned her glare on Aten. Really? You used me visiting against my son. Are you trying to drive a wedge between us? Make him avoid me? I won't stand for it. Joe, as your mother, I want you to find a way to feed the people. As a businesswoman, make sure that the reward you get upon return is worth it, or else you make sure to hold on to the means of production and sell the food at a reasonable price. Outfit the operation yourself and talk to me if you need a place to sell in the kingdom. In a week or so, I'll be taking over odds and ends, and you can always sell through me. Aten looked aggrieved and rubbed weary eyes. Then he locked eyes with Joe and said, 30,000 contribution points, 30,000 upon completion, and 15,000 points, no matter what. I swear we'll put plenty of effort into this, and we need to be compensated for that amount of time, no matter what. Also, outfit us for the trip, Aten. Joe sighed and went over to give his mom a hug. Give us 2 weeks' worth of gear. I can't imagine that this will be a quick trip. Deal. Aten nodded his head, and the notification appeared in Joe's vision again. This time, the quest was accepted. Music, Chapter 9. All right, guys. Joe and his team were sitting around a tiny table at the coffee shop planning out their goals for the new quest. What do we need to do to make this happen? Jess raised her hand, and Joe pointed at her. Please don't do that. Just speak when you have something to say. High school is over. Gotcha! Jess grabbed a chunk of chalk from the table and started drawing on the wood. There are more things to consider here than simply growing or importing food. There are the logistics of getting it here, having people to work with it, and places to store it if it isn't used right away. Here's what I think we need, in no particular order. Firstly, I think that it's important that we produce the food ourselves. If that means growing it, fine. If that means magical items, whatever, so long as they're able to make it happen long term. With that in mind, we need to make buildings to store food before we're producing large quantities of it. We can start with a little production to keep from starving. But this is something to keep in mind. Food rots fast, and as this is a game, I expect that there will be other issues to take into account. Jess was making a long list, and the entire party was enraptured. Warehouses? Yes. Cold storage means good insulation on the building, which means high-quality materials used in the construction. Anyone know when winter is due in here? Is there winter? I'll look into it. Poppy stood up and walked off at a brisk pace. Good. Jess looked back at the list with a furrowed brow. Roads, We need good roads between our buildings if we want to be able to transport stuff. Walls to keep out thieves and protect our workers. Workers? Now that means a place for them to sleep, so an apartment at the minimum, some form of entertainment so they don't need to go too far, and winter is a thing, and the edge of it is about a month out, I think. Poppy popped back in with the information, making Bart jump and cuss softly at the scare. Good. Perfect. Jess took a deep breath and looked Joe directly in the eyes. In that case, in my professional opinion, I think that you need to find a way to make a greenhouse. Greenhouse? Joe parroted. He was in shock from having a full plan laid out like this. Wow. I was going to go on a quest for a magical cornucopia or something. Jess shook her head. This is far more likely to exist. Fair enough. Joe looked around. All in favor of going searching for blueprints to a greenhouse? Let's do it, Alexis put out into the group. Everyone else nodded, so Joe did so as well. All right. He looked at Jess. You've really proven yourself. I'm going to give you a task while we're gone, too. Okay? Show that we can trust you when we aren't around, and we'll make sure it's worth your while. All of this. Joe motioned at the charts and list she was still making. Get all the material you need for these. I'm going to give you a token to claim land for me as well. Find what you think will be a good spot and start hiring people. Get the foundation set up. Make roads to where buildings will be. Don't worry about actually building. Just get everything else ready. Jess hesitated, then nodded. We should also work out my salary. Find what's fair, add 20%, and make it happen. Joe grinned at her. I'll get you access to an account. Make sure to keep receipts. I highly doubt that we're done paying taxes just because we're in a new world. All that changed was who collects them. It also lets you see what I buy, Jess sweetly added. Yes, Joe agreed bluntly. Consider it done, boss man. Jess mock saluted and looked around. Don't forget to get geared up. Knew I was forgetting something. Joe blew a raspberry and stood up. All right, guys, I'm going to pop over to the city for a shopping trip. Anyone want a ride? Let's do it, Jackson agreed winningly. Joe chuckled nervously. Everyone except Jess decided to go along, and the team walked into the temple and teleported into the main square of Ardania. Remember, Joe, Alexis stated sternly. You are here for getting gear, not for researching. We'll do that too, just make sure that you get what you need for survival. On it, Joe promised with crossed fingers. I see that, she glared. If you die because you didn't do this right, I'm going to be so mad. Joe simply skipped off, headed for the market. He went for the odds and ends shop right away, but also put masterwork metals on his list. As he walked into the first shop, he spied his mother and the current owner discussing stock over hot tea. He was confused for a moment as to how she had beat him here, but remembered that she had access to the same transportation network that he did. Hi there. I was hoping that I could get some help with upgrading my current gear. The owner looked at him and harumphed. Hello there, youngling. Here to run me out of business again? Tell everyone about outdated prices. Nothing like that, just the gear this time. Joe responded to the curmudgeon as happily as possible. I see that you lost your little keep-me-alive robe since I last saw you. Where did it get off to? Her tone implied that she had better like the answer. I'm really sorry to say, Joe had to hold in his frustration. I lost it in an instant dungeon to the boss. He sighs. I died right after, so I'm uncertain as to what happened. Not to be trusted with higher-tier enchanted gear, huh? The old woman muttered to herself. Nothing like that. Joe shook his head vehemently. I'm pretty sure that I told you that all magical gear is alive, even if just barely. Yes. The ancient person stared at him with nearly mummified eyes. The more powerfully made, the more alive it is. That building you made, I give it a year or two at the most until it is awake. What are you doing to protect that new young mind? Joe thought about it and needed to make sure to choose his words carefully. I am helping build a powerful, noble guild around it. As we go forward, there will be powerful people and powerful protections in place. All of these will have a vested interest in keeping it strong and protected. There was a pause. I suppose that keeping you away from the good stuff will only weaken you in the long run and prevent you from keeping the building strong. I suppose that's a good enough reason to sell to you. Come here. Let's find you something that suits you. Hi, Mom. Thanks for the help there. Joe only got a serene smile in reply, so he knew that she was in agreement with the old lady for some reason. What are you after? The old lady demanded. What do you think you need? I need as much mana and mana regen as possible, Joe responded instantly. I use lots and lots, and then even more mana. I see. She walked away and came back a few minutes later with a full set of luxurious purple gear. Here's my offer. I have a set of robes that will boost mana regen by 1%, shirt, pants, underwear, and socks that all do the same. Together, this becomes a set of gear called Wise Man's Wardrobe. When worn all together, it grants a 15% mana regen bonus, is self-cleaning, and does minor self-repair. Also, future note, all socks are set items. These ones just work with the rest of this gear. Got it. Joe looked at the gear, noting that the gear was only categorized as rare. Is this the best that I can get? Or is this your highest recommendation for me? Recommendation. Both. The cool answer came. It doesn't add any armor, but it can take care of itself to a small degree. And I think that is going to be more important to any gear you purchase in the future. I see. Joe nodded and took the gear, paying a price of 200 gold, or 12 platinum. That nearly made him gag, and that was after his discount. Attempts at haggling were met with a stony glare, and he had no choice but to accept the price tag that could be seen on large buildings for sale in town. Is there anything else you would recommend? Or do you have any of these items? He presented a list, and she shook her head. That would all come from the Architects Guild. Blueprints or blueprint paper at least. Otherwise, you could always learn to make your own, or buy from the Mages' College. The inks and such could be purchased from the alchemist, or again, made yourself. Raw material from the alchemist as well. Joe thought of the creepy alchemist, Jake, and winced. He'd rather not need to go in there, but if that was the best option going forward. Joe nodded, equipped his gear, and strolled out of the shop. Next on the list was masterwork metals, mostly just to see if he could find anything interesting. He'd only been there a few times at the start of his time in this world, but he had a favorable impression of the owner. After browsing the shop and not seeing anything, Joe asked the owner if he could make weapon augments, like his titanium tag lock. His wasn't in danger of breaking, but if you waited until you needed something, you were setting yourself up for failure. The smith wasn't impressed with his request. Tag locks, huh? That's a nasty little implement you've got there. Yeah, I can make them. I just don't like to do so. I prefer making weapon and armor augments that help people protect themselves. Armor augments? Joe greedily leaned forward. Do tell. The smith looked Joe up and down. All right, well, you're creeping me out, but yeah. You can take any type of armor or weapon and make an augment out of it. Essentially gives you boosted skill points for the type of gear it was. You can also try to make them yourself, but I gotta warn you, they are expensive for a reason. Now, you can also get basic augments like that tag lock pretty easy, since it is actually just another smaller weapon strapped to the first one. Same name, very different results. How do you make the skill style augments? Joe started recording the conversation on his personal notepad. Well, first, you take the class and learn how to do it. The smith grinned crookedly. But the short version is that you take a chunk of gear and try to extract its meaning, which destroys the gear whether you succeed or fail, and only gives you a fairly small boost even if you do get the augment. Better to pay the price, boyo. Gotcha. Joe already had plenty of skills to bring up, but he would get to this one eventually. There had to be some reason it existed. Thanks. Can I get a few of these tag locks, though? Sure, why not? The smith waved him away and told him they would be ready in a few days. Joe turned to leave, then stopped himself and got directions to a glass blower. When he got to the glass blower, he put in a large order for hundreds of sheets of glass. They were all to be the same size and thickness, and he made sure to let the man know that he would come back every few days to get whatever had been made until that point. A quick stop at the alchemist, and Joe felt that he was as ready for the next steps as he could be. All ready for the trials ahead, Joe saw that he had a few hours until the assigned meeting time. So naturally, he wandered over to the library and started researching mentions of greenhouses or other styles of easily growing large amounts of food in as short a time as possible. Chapter 10. You're telling me that there is no lumber, nails, anything that I can purchase in bulk? Joe was at the Architects Guild doing his best to get a deal while he could. He had found a good lead at the library, so he needed to take care of a few other issues if possible. What if I paid a premium, 10% over asking price? I'm telling you, Mr. Joe. The woman he was speaking with was adamantly shaking her head and holding her ground. We are bought out for the next 2 months at the minimum. We honor our deals here. When we say you are next in line, you are. And, well, frankly, you're not the first to try and get in good with us. You want lumber? You're going to either need to wait or get people to cut trees and make planks for you. Joe thought on that for a moment and bobbed his head in understanding. I see. Well, I can't say I don't like your honesty and the fact that you stick to your deals. Actually, it makes me want to work with you even more, which is frustrating because I can't for now. This is a conundrum. The lady seemed to relax a small amount and nodded. Thank you for understanding. Not everyone has been so... sighs. Anyway, is there anything else I can help you with? Yes. Well, while I'm here, can I take a look at any blueprints that you have available for sale? Joe asked hopefully. That's a no. Sorry. She denied him instantly. Blueprints are essentially the secret techniques of our guild. Mages have their spell books, alchemists have potion recipes. We have our blueprints. Now you are welcome to sell blueprints to us, but we can't sell any to you. I see. Joe knew right then and there that he would never sell anything to this organization. It might seem petty, but when a group refused to share the knowledge that they hoarded just so they could force people to work with or for them, Joe didn't ever want to get sucked into them. That was his real issue with guilds, unions, or colleges. A monopoly by any name was still hurtful to the overall progress of the world. Now people wouldn't even be able to build new homes without going through this group, and they were busy for the next several months. Despicable. Well, he had his own method for creating blueprints and raising buildings, but he still needed supplies and a way to get blueprint paper. Would your group be willing to sell blank blueprints, so that I can attempt to create workable blueprints? Oh, of course. The seller gave him a charming smile, and he could practically feel his wisdom trying to fight against her obviously high charisma. Each paper costs 2 gold, but that won't be an issue for an adventurer of your quality. Or we could work out a deal where you don't rip me off. Joe chuckled at the pout that appeared on her face. How about you let me take a look at the papers first? She walked out of the room and returned shortly with a stack of paper 2 feet high, and the paper was light blue, and she gestured for him to take a look. Just so you know, any damage means that you've bought it. Understood. Joe carefully began going through the stack, separating the paper off and adding some to a pile on the side, after staring at it, feeling it, and gently waving it through the air. After he'd gone through the entire stack, he turned to the paper he had set aside and made 3 piles. His spellbinder skill was nagging at him, which was why he was taking his time to really look at the paper. He needed paper that could contain the magic that he would be putting through it, and there weren't many that made the cut. When he had gone through everything, he put away the paper that hadn't been up to the standard that he felt he needed. I'll give you a gold each. Highway robbery? She gasped, putting both hands over her mouth. Or I can ask one of the other sellers if they can make a better deal. Joe finished his sentence. And what a good deal it is. She shook his hand and looked at the paper he had set aside. That'll be 15 gold then. Anything else I can get you? On to your waiting list for supplies. Joe added an extra gold to the pile he was counting out, and when he saw her raised eyebrow, he explained. That's to fit me in right away if there's a cancellation, not to jump into the current line. Here are the contact details for my assistant. I see. She nodded. Joe added the paper to his storage ring, and they parted ways. Joe still had a half hour until he needed to meet the others in the town square, so he went into a restaurant and ordered a coffee. He had a good view of the square from here, and was surprised to see that the place was packed. From all the starting gear, he could tell that this had to be a part of the influx of new people joining the world. Joe had taken a few minutes to watch the president's speech, but frankly he was still shocked that so many people were taking it seriously, even though it was a serious situation. Most news channels had been screaming hoax. A problem for future Joe, he said aloud, shaking his head and pulling out a blueprint. The paper was the lowest quality that he could find that would still be useful. He was going to try and see if his hunch about creating a magical blueprint was correct. As gently as he could manage, he began flooding the paper with mana. He felt it strain and press against his power, and saw a few notifications appear in his view as the paper erupted into flames and burnt his hands and face. Attempting to create magical blueprint, compiling data from all relevant skills. Spellbinder increases strength of paper by 63%. Magical material creation allows for a 9% increased density of mana matrix. Attempt to make blank magical blueprint. Failed. Exquisite shell absorbs 129 mana and fire damage. Your exquisite shell has been destroyed. You have taken 24 magical fire damage. Skill increase. Magical material creation. Apprentice. 0. Congratulations. Skill increase. Exquisite shell. Novice 5. Blow yourself up again for reasons. Great way to raise this skill. You have healed 24 damage. Current health, 230 out of 230. Joe shook his face to get the residual water off and tried to calm himself. He knew that he should have refreshed his shell after getting smacked around, but he hadn't thought it would matter so much in the city. Ignoring all the strange looks he was getting from the people around him eating lunch, he released his mana and formed a fresh shell around himself. Joe hadn't liked the snarky message, but there was a hint of good advice in there. Might as well use his failures to grow. He sipped his now tepid coffee and waited for his mana to regenerate. When he was back to full, he pulled out another paper and concentrated on it, ignoring the people scooting away from him at nearby tables. Joe kept a careful hold on his mana, smoothly applying a layer of the powerful energy to the paper and attempting to get it to sink into the blueprint. He felt something in his mind click, and he cut off the flow of power, attempting to create magical blueprint, compiling data from all relevant skills. Spellbinder increases strength of paper by 63%. Magical material creation allows for a 10% increased density of mana matrix. Attempt to make blank magical blueprint. Success. Item gained. Blank magical blueprint. Uncommon. You have turned the mundane into the mystical by infusing this seemingly ordinary blueprint with mana. As an uncommon quality blueprint, it can store the information for a building at uncommon quality or below. Nice. Joe smiled and brought the paper to his lap, where it vanished into his codpiece. He tended to keep the rare and important things in there, as it was more likely that someone could steal his ring than his codpiece. Also, if they did steal his ring, they would think they got all of his valuables. A fresh paper appeared in his hands, and he started again. Boom! Joe coughed a cloud of smoke, staring at his hands that should have been charred. His shell had taken the entirety of the damage, but he still had at least half of it remaining. He had gone into the process too excited, and the result spoke for itself. Joe tried again, and once again his shell took damage. As another paper appeared in his hand, the server came over and told him, in no uncertain terms, to leave. Joe checked the time, realized that he was already almost late, and agreed to go. Since he had already paid, he simply turned and hopped off the balcony. Joe landed perfectly in the square below, then fell to the ground. His stamina had failed him, since he had needed to make so many adjustments as he fell, so as not to crush someone. Whoops. He had forgotten about the new arrivals. He got to his feet and brushed his butt off, then started walking to the agreed-upon spot to meet his friends. Joe found that moving through the crowd was difficult, and very few of the newbies seemed to know what they were doing or where to go. It was also loud, and a whole lot of people were calling for help or directions, while the kingdom's people tried to direct them. There were also less than scrupulous people recruiting for guilds, and Joe made sure to remember their guild name for later, just in case. There he is, Joe. You who follow the sounds of the screams? Jackson's voice called through the crowd, but Joe couldn't see from where. Then he heard the trumpeting of a tea. Rex followed quickly by screams of fear from people who had tea. Rex had hands snapping at them. Hi, Joe. Glad you found us. Nice new gear. Hi, Jackson. Joe tried hard not to laugh, but seeing his friends smiling at him while T-Rex heads snapped at empty air was too much for him. Laughs. Chapter 11. Now I'm wondering where our guild got that building blueprint that they had me use to build that building. Joe mumbled to himself. Blue. Say that 10 times fast. It was already on a magical blueprint, and I feel like that isn't something they just found. Do we have a rogue architect? Joe! Poppy snapped his fingers in front of Joe and made the man jump. This resulted in a backflip and stylish landing, but it was still unwelcome. What did you want to show us before we left the city? Having all these people around me all the time is not comfy. I feel like there have to be at least a few dozen people in here that are leveling up thieving skills, and I want to be gone before they practice on me. Right. Sorry. We're almost there. Promise? Joe smiled and sped up, finding that the crowd thinned as they got closer to the guards' areas. Maybe Poppy had a point about thieves. Joe walked over to the captain's area and knocked on the door. It took a long moment, but then the door popped open and a surprised face poked out. "Joe, what is it? Is everything okay?" The captain was concerned, seeing a group waiting for him. "Nothing new, Dad?" Joe responded with wide arms. "I just wanted to play catch with you, get a few hugs, and talk about when the wedding will be." Captain Blas went pale, and he started looking for an exit or a weapon to fend off the crazy man at his house. Joe chuckled and dropped his arms. "Just kidding. I wanted to ask permission to scan a barracks. I have a new spell that'll allow me to make a copy of a building's blueprint, and we need sleeping areas pretty badly over at the guild." The captain dropped his arms and heaved a sigh of relief. "I can't see that being an issue, but I'll come with just to get ahead of any problems. This is a safe process?" "Pretty sure," Joe promised, getting a look in return. "Then I'm definitely coming along." Blas shut the door and followed them to a barracks, watching in fascination as Joe had his now grumbling team stand around him in an odd spacing, the four of them in a square around where Joe stood in the center. Joe pulled out a circular metal disc, the only magical blueprint he had managed to create, and a mid-grade rare core. "All right, everyone, I made the diagram for this ritual, Architect's Fury, ahead of time so we could hurry away here. You all ready? Here we go." He put a touch of mana into the disc to activate it, and lines of power wrapped around Joe and his team. 4 magical circles appeared around them, but in a moment, 2 of the circles lifted off and joined together in midair. Then those 2 went to the building, ran along the walls, and seemed to swallow the entire structure. The power contained in the rings made it seem like the building was going to be burnt to a crisp, but there was no damage done as the rings drifted away from the barracks. The rings flew in front of Joe and shrank down and down, then into the blueprint paper he had supplied. The paper shifted back and forth like a bear scratching its back on a tree, then settled onto Joe's open palm. He looked around, noting that his team was on the ground, panting. His own mana had touched 0 a couple of times, but he had come prepared. Joe stored the empty mana potion bottle in his ring, hoping that he would be able to get some other usage out of the high-quality glass later. Reuse and all that. "Good job, everyone. We got the blueprint of an uncommon rank barracks, and this means we can get the people relying on us a whole lot of sleeping space." Joe pulled Bard to his feet, and the thick man swatted his hands away with a grumble. "Thank you all for your help. And yes, I am working on a way to keep you from having to do this again." Blas looked at the barracks and saw no damage, so he waved the group away and went off to do his own thing. Laughs. Joe smiled as he looked at the barracks ritual diagram, and his team all started walking back to the square to teleport to the guild area again. Alexis caught her breath and looked at Joe critically. "No armor?" "No, but this gives me 15% increased mana regen," Joe informed her. "That means that I can keep going in battle a lot longer and just get my shield back if it goes down. It also self-cleans and repairs over time." Alexis kept walking, but Joe couldn't tell if she was approving or annoyed by his life and armor choices. They teleported back to the demolished area the guild now owned and split up to take care of personal things before heading out. Joe went to find Ethan, hoping to get some good brownie points in before asking for the next few things that he was going to need on his journey. After waiting in the line for a short while, he got into the main area where both Ethan and Mike were slumped over their desks. Both were trying to focus on what was happening. Both were trying to read the next thing that needed to be signed. Joe felt pity for them at that moment, but reinforced his mindset while hardening his heart. There was a reason he hadn't wanted to start his own guild. Joe slapped his hand on the desk, and both men jolted back. "Hey guys, listen, if you have the resources for it, I can get together with your people and get an uncommon barracks set up now. I'm gonna need a lot of help, but we can get a few hundred people sleeping in shelter tonight if we work fast." "Sleep?" Mike blearily called out. "Mike, he's Joe." A10 shook his head and giggled. "That's not a bed." "Wow, you guys need sleep." Joe got the men on their feet and pulled them toward the quartermaster. "Here's a list. You need to get all these resources to wherever you want this monstrosity to go. Hop to it. People want to get inside." A10 made motions at the quartermaster, who nodded and got a few teams of people running supplies. Massive amounts of strength or access to spatial storage devices made quick work of the needed components, and the man pulled a core out of a small vault and handed it to Joe with a frown. That was the real downside to this process. A core was needed to create the blueprint. A core was required to build the building. The cost of these two items was nearly equivalent to erecting a couple buildings, especially common ones. At least 2 cores was the cost, if anyone else were using the ritual. So Joe simply kept whatever remained after using a core in his rituals as partial payment for services rendered. Still, in terms of convenience, the use of so many expensive cores was the best possible trade that could be made. Zap! Whoosh! A building appears. Joe followed the others to where the barracks would be built, and the town planner had already zoned off an area. There were a lot of tents that had been in the area, but since it was only late afternoon, they were largely unoccupied. Joe looked around at the gathering crowd and had an idea. "I need volunteers to help with the spell. 10 minutes of work, and you get a spot in the building that'll be built here." There were enough takers that Joe felt excited about his chances at keeping some mana. 29 people in total stood where Joe had directed them, and as he looked around for others, he saw Bard and Alexis laughing at the people that had stepped up. Hopefully no one would notice them before... It was... Dear bells, too late. "Here we go." Joe held out the ritual that had inscribed itself on the blueprint, feeding mana into it and feeling the core in his hand begin to drain. Since rituals cost 67% less for him, thanks to his ritual magic skill, he only lost about a third of the core and could make 2 more buildings if he needed to do so. Fun. The group of almost 30 lifted into the air on bands of power. The stacks of building material below them started to float alongside them, and then tiny bolts of power began dripping off the ritual and onto the material like rain falling on ruins. The wood, stone, and metals began to arrange themselves, looking for all the world like a building being blown up in slow motion and in reverse. The building toppled upward, the roof being built first, then the interior from the top down. Joe laughed when he saw that happen. It reminded him of old engineering jokes. As the foundation of the building settled in place, the group arrived on the ground with a swirl of air that tossed the surrounding dust and dirt into the air. Ritual blueprint loses 1 point of durability. Uses remaining 2 out of 3. Class experience plus 100. What? Did that mean that he could reuse this same ritual diagram 2 more times? Yes, it looked like he could. Was that because he created the ritual by using a ritual? When he altered a blueprint directly, adding a ritual around it, The ritual was only single use, but... Then he could just scan it, right? Use a new building to make 3 more? Not a bad deal. Joe started to congratulate the others, then realized that most of them were unconscious. Then he realized that the majority of them were fighter classes, and he had just forcefully unlocked their magic for them. Oops. Joe walked over to Aten and slapped him on the side. Hey, Aten. All done here, buddy. Listen, there are a few things that I'm gonna need for my trip, and I was hoping you could help me out. Here's a list. McDT. The two of them started to walk back to Aten's office, but Joe paused and smiled brightly at Mike. Hey, Mike. Yes, Joe. Mike looked away from the immaculate new building and at the Ritu architect. Joe pointed upward at the roof of the building. This one has shingles. Chapter 12. Everyone. The voice boomed over the area, and Joe recognized it as Aten's serious voice. I need you all to listen closely. If you can open your browser right now, I need you to do so. You're in a safe zone, so you should be able to do so. Look at the news. We'll be having a meeting soon to discuss our next course of action. Joe sat up and followed instructions, opening the first news channel he could find and pressing play on the current stream. He blanched as he recognized San Francisco, specifically when he saw that the city was under attack and burning. Things were coming out of the ocean, and Joe winced as he saw a massive tentacle lift out of the sea and wrap around the Golden Gate Bridge. In moments, the bridge was whisked away with a shriek of tearing metal. The newscaster, pale and disheveled, replaced the view and held a paper in shaking hands. Attacks like this are happening worldwide, with the coastal areas taking the most initial damage. The military is not taking action, as they and their families have all apparently vanished in the same manner as President Musk. Government officials have just... They're gone, huh? Police, medical, no one is coming, no one is out there to help or give instructions, and I'm going too, as soon as I finish here. Reports are coming in now. He gulped from a glass that was on the desk next to him, and the color suggested that it wasn't water. These monsters aren't moving all that quickly, and it is recommended that you move inland as fast as possible, running whenever the option presents itself. Just like Musk said, even with a slow pace at this rate, there will be monsters everywhere within a month. Personally, I recommend that you take this core, slap it to your head, and flee to safety. The anchorman vanished as soon as he had followed his own instructions, and the stream cut off with a technical difficulties message. Joe stared at the screen, mortified by what he had seen. How many people would think that this was still a hoax, would ignore the warnings? Probably too many. Even still, what was the population of Ardania? A few million. What would happen if even 10% of people made it into the game? The population would jump to nearly 1 billion people, all starting their journey in Ardania. He hopped out of bed and started jogging toward the guild meeting, knowing that he would need to hear what was said. Joe didn't have to wait long after he arrived. Aten walked out with Mike and a few other officers and started shouting over the noise to get their attention. Listen up. This changes very little for us. We need to continue fortifying our location, secure resources, and prepare to fend off raiders. Let's be realistic, people. We are in an enviable position right now, and there are going to be hungry people in the not-too-distant future. We are going to do everything that we can to help as many people as possible, but we all know that won't be enough for some of them. There will be people that want to take what you have by force. Be prepared. Do your duty. Who comes for the wanderers? The strongest, the best. We kill all the rest. The crowd called back to him, some more enthusiastically than others. It was easy to be, highly motivated when you were only doing this for fun. Less so when it was your life and you could see your civilization getting destroyed. As a side note, we are halting all guild invitations or requests to join. Eten's words were met with silence. We need to be very careful about who we take on from now on to ensure that we have the infrastructure to support them. Good luck with everything you're all doing, people. The whole point is that we'd be overrun with not the strongest or the best, so that chant was really out of place. Maybe I should talk to him about rebranding the guild. Joe looked at the time and decided that it wasn't worth the effort of either discussing a point of semantics or trying to go back to bed. Instead, he walked to the coffee shop and added his name to the growing list of people that were requesting the fragrant drink, then took his seat and pulled out his puzzle cube. Might as well get a jump on the day. Joe decided where he wanted to start, waited for his coffee, then downed it and got to puzzling. People around him came and went, but he didn't notice, too enthralled by the cube in front of him. An hour and 45 minutes later, the sun was in the sky and he was finished for the day. Characteristic point training completed. +1 to intelligence, wisdom, perception, and dexterity. These stats cannot be increased further by any means other than system rewards, study, or practice for 24 hours game time. Name: Joe, Tatum's chosen legend. Class: Mage. Actual: Ritui. Architect. Profession: Tenured Scholar. Actual: Archaeologist. Character: Level: 15. Experience: 125,993. Experience to next level: 10,007. Ritui. Architect. Level: 2. Experience: 2,290. Experience to next level: 710. Hit points: 230 out of 230. Mana: 963 out of 963. Mana regen: 23.65 per second. Base 20. 57 per second. Increased by gear. Stamina: 200. Characteristic: Raw score modifier. Strength: 22, 1.22. Dexterity: 33, 1.33. Constitution: 28, 128. Intelligence: 74, 224. Wisdom: 68, 218. Charisma: 26, 126. Perception: 53, 2.03. Luck: 30, 130. Karmic. Luck: +3. Joe took a deep breath and let out a satisfied sigh. That was good stuff. Here I go. He stood up and brushed off his new robe, then pulled his mystic theurge staff out of his ring and used it as a walking stick as he walked over to find his group. They needed to get a move on. Daylight was burning. He found them in the usual places: training, crafting, and in Jackson's case, a small stall that was offering buffs to passer-by. Joe shook his head at the hand-painted sign, which featured sad-faced people crawling in, then walking out with smiles. They all joined together and Joe laid out his plan. Here's what I found, guys. It isn't much, but it'll give us a starting point. Joe pulled out the only map he had been able to purchase, a sketchy drawing that he was pretty sure was of this continent. Take a look at this. Here we are about 30 miles north of Ardenia. Here's Ardenia. Here's the edge of the continent. If we continue north for about 100 miles, we get to the northern edge. If we go south of Ardenia, we have about 200 miles until the edge. Now, as you get closer to the edges, the monsters get stronger. Joe waffled his hand back and forth. At least that's what the guy who sold me this thinks. The point is, I found mention that there used to be people that could encourage plants to grow in any season. They could have been druids or the like, but from the book, I think they were elves. We know for a fact that there are no elves on this continent anymore. But if there was going to be a place with a greenhouse or similar technology, I think that is the spot to look right here. South and west of Ardinia by about 130 miles. It'll be fun. One question, Alexis offered as soon as he finished speaking. Shoot. When did you do this research? Yesterday? She stared him down and Joe began to sweat. You didn't just buy the first gear you found and then go gallivanting off to the library, right? That would be irresponsible. I got the best gear that I could from the most trustworthy source I know. Joe coughed into his hand and looked at anyone but Alexis. Any other questions? Are you Joe, the chosen of Tatum? A new voice asked him. Joe started to turn to answer the person asking and felt an impact on his exquisite shell. Divine shell, huh? Joe shouted an inarticulate cry that alerted his team, and the man that had just tried to assassinate him glowered. Oh, I think not. I challenge you to a duel of the chosen. Duel of the chosen. Instance initiated. You have been challenged by the chosen of ? There is no way to refuse this duel, and no outside source can help or hinder either of you. Good luck and fight well for your deity. Success. Progress toward quest. No, I'm right. 100 favor points from your deity. 1,000 divine energy for your deity. Failure. Loss of 100 favor points from your deity. 1,000 divine energy lost by your deity. What in? By... Joe looked around, seeing that he was still in the same spot, but that there were no other people present, except probably the person that had challenged him to a duel. Joe was in a bad position. He had no anti-personnel rituals, no spell scrolls that would be useful here, and he had no idea what this other fighter would be capable of doing. Ting. Joe felt an impact on his back and turned to find a wetly glistening dagger scraping against his shell and slowly sinking closer to him. He jumped back a few feet, crossing the distance like he was teleporting thanks to his master jump skill. He couldn't let himself get pinned down. Slow-moving weapons sinking into his flesh would kill him just as much as fast-moving weapons. You are slow and weak. The mocking voice reached Joe's ears. You serve a weak, pathetic deity, and I'm going to hunt you until he vanishes from the world. Phew, you sure are driving the bus to Crazy Town, buddy, Joe called back, looking at the man that was still standing casually in front of him. You realize that isn't a thing, right? That you're in a new world, sure, but also a game world. Just die and let me collect my favor. The response was annoyed, no longer as if a role player was getting his kicks. The man dashed forward, throwing knives at Joe's face to try and distract him. Joe ignored the blades, fully focused on the shadows he had been wrapping around the unknown man's ankles. Just one more second. Solidified shadows. Joe focused the mana through his mystic theurge staff and let the manacles he had created become tangible. The other guy tripped instantly, slamming to the ground and letting out an oof as the wind was knocked out of him. He rolled forward and sprang up, a mace in his hand that he whacked Joe across the face with before smashing the shadows around his legs. Joe reeled, the force of the blow forcing him to take a few steps backward. How did you even know where to come after me? You have a bounty, the man informed him. You keep showing up at the main temple and going toward the evil side of the place, before vanishing for a few seconds, coming back, then turning around and leaving. We know you're whisked away by some dark power that's hiding your real affiliation. I'm only the first of the people that are gonna try collecting. That I can grind some favor is only a fringe benefit. Down with the dark gods. But a bottle was tossed at Joe, and in an instant he was surrounded by blazing light that he couldn't see through. Was it a flashbang of some kind, with an extra long flash? Just before he was sent flying, Joe heard the words, "Holy Smite." He landed on the ground and bounced, his shield at a critical level, Joe got up, ready to end this guy. Enough was enough. Acid spray. Once more, power ran through his staff and changed forms. This time to a potent acid. He had caught the man running at him full in the face, and Joe decided to channel this spell. He could only cast a single spell at a time while using the staff, so it stood to reason that he kept hosing this creep down. "My robe!" the man sputtered as his outer layer of clothing fell apart. "You jerk! For a Taurian, holy smite!" Joe was rocked back, tumbling across the ground again. This time his shell shattered and he took damage. Holy Smite deals 300 light damage, 262 damage absorbed by exquisite shell. HP negative 38. Joe popped back to his feet and whipped his staff around. This guy wanted to play with light? Fine. Joe started grabbing the shadows and spinning them into a whirling concertina wire. He stared at the other man who had fallen to his knees and was just now struggling to his feet. Joe almost felt bad for the guy. The acid had done a number on his everything. That was fine, though, and Joe had needed a solid 10 seconds to get the wire how he wanted it anyway. He sent the darkness after his opponent, only at the last second activating solidified shadows and shredding the man into meat paste. Joe coughed and looked down, finding 3 daggers embedded in his chest. When had he thrown? Duel of the Chosen complete. You have earned progress toward the ongoing quest. No, I'm right. You have defeated your first opponent. Success. You gain 100 reputation points from your deity and 1,000 divine energy for your deity. You have died. Calculating. PvP Chosen duel. No experience lost. You will be respawned at your bind point in 1 hour. Chapter 13. Joe was furious about the interruption, but had nothing to do and so used the short amount of time that he had remaining until respawn researching what was happening out in the real world, while most of the new centers were slowly going off air, especially since they were mainly coastal broadcasting stations. There were plenty of people streaming from their phones. It looked like a nightmare come to life, and there didn't seem to be much anyone could do to stop what was happening. Bullets dealt some damage, but unless it was a perfect shot or really high caliber, not much happened at all to the monster getting shot. Not many people that were standing their ground were surviving for very long. High-powered weapons were hard to get a hold of. The government was gone, so there were no bombs, tanks, or missiles hitting. That was actually for the best, most likely, as the issue was so widespread that there would have been as much loss of life and property damage from friendly fire either way. The portal opened for Joe, and he stepped through and into the Pathfinder's hall. He walked around and found his people again, then explained what had happened. It's fine. It just seems to be something that's going to be happening from now on. Listen, it'll be easier for me if we got moving. The fewer people that know where I am at any given time would be lovely. Anyone need anything? No? Great. They all went to the temple section of the Pathfinder's hall and teleported as far south as possible. Ardania. Joe felt sick looking around. The entire place was stuffed, and more people were arriving every second. Quick! Let's get out of here. Exiting the continuously growing crowd was not easy, and there was far more pushing and shoving than Joe wanted to use. He stood behind Bart, using the Scald as a tank that slowly drove the crowd. At one point, Joe heard a yelp, and Alexis suddenly was sporting a nasty smile. Some thief just learned that it's a bad idea to pick my pocket. There was a nasty pain poison in there that will also turn his hand red for a few days. Joe needed to stop in the shopping district to grab as many glass panes as had been completed. Then they simply continued through the city on the main road until they came out the southern gates. Joe had never been this way before or this far, and it took a little while to realize how truly massive this city was. 25 million permanent residents had not made this a small space, and being a self-sustaining city meant that there were crops and places for animals to graze as well. The size and scope of the wall that surrounded the entire city made Joe's head spin. They had already been traveling for hours by the time the southern gate came into view, and they were ready to abandon the city and get some fresh air and elbow room. They passed into the wild lands that were south of Ardania, and all of a sudden, there was practically no one around them. Most of the newbies were far too scared to go out and about, and none of them had signed up to be torn apart by monsters. In fact, they were specifically running from that. Joe's group started making good time at that point, and they were able to follow a basic dirt road that seemed to align with their destination pretty well. "Joe!" "Yee." Poppy startled the party leader out of his thoughts and pointed at a small building that was just off the path. "Is that one of those fast travel points that you can use?" The Ritue architect took a closer look, and sure enough, there was a shrine next to the road. Like most of the other ones that he had seen to this point, the shrine was eroded and faded. Whatever it had once been dedicated to could be a fun debate, but Joe decided that he would rather just take it for himself in Tatum. "Thanks, Poppy. You guys want a break really quick?" "Sounds nice to me." Jackson gave Joe a thumbs up and started doing seemingly impossible stretches on the ground next to the shrine. The others sat just out of view and pulled out some food for a makeshift lunch. Joe walked over to the shrine and put his hand on the small altar. "You have found an unguarded shrine. As you are not currently under attack, you have the option to rededicate this shrine to your deity. Would you like to do so now? Yes? No?" After saying yes, the heavily eroded shrine simply collapsed inward as Joe's mana washed outward. More and more mana fell off, and Joe struggled to keep upright as the shrine sank away and was replaced by a small building. The patchwork roof turned into a stone book placed upside down, and the walls became books placed open and upright. All in all, a proper rest stop. You have earned a reward from the continuous quest, Reclamation of the Lost. After making a new shrine for Tatum, you have been blessed. You have gained +1 strength. Quest update Reclamation of the Lost. Daily divine energy generation has increased by 100. "Looking good?" Alexis called over as the sun hit the white marble of the new shrine. "Thanks," Joe called back distractedly. He had his eyes closed and was listening for the nagging sensation that usually accompanied finding a waypoint. Something else was ringing in his ears, though, and it stayed as constant as tinnitus. What was that? Joe focused in on it and suddenly realized that the entire shrine had a single note of music continuously coming off of it. Skill increased. Magical synesthesia, Novice 2. Realizing the directional angle of this skill was the important first step toward mastery. Or did you just so happen to look in the direction after hearing the sound? I suppose it makes sense that this is a magical building. Joe stared at the shrine and decided to look in all the standard places. He followed all the lines and checked each crevice. He only found the bind point after he almost gave up, then followed a hunch and pressed his finger into a page on the ceiling. He lost a point of health and a drop of blood, but a white ring of energy seemed to expand outward for about 10 paces, and Joe knew that he had found what he was looking for. Excellent. "Hey guys," Joe called to the others. "Looks like we can make a trail of these and use them for fast travel if we keep finding and converting them, so keep an eye out." "So we could sleep every night in the guild and then just resume our trip in the morning?" Alexis perked up considerably at this happy news. "It shall be my first priority, party leader." Joe rolled his eyes, even as Bard chuckled. Maybe being in a relationship made odd comments like that seem funny. Joe also decided not to mention the fact that if he had enough shrines, his deity would get unlocked in the future. They didn't need to know. "At least we won't need to go into Ardania if we don't want to." The others pulled faces at the thought of going back there, and they decided to get on the road again. After they had been walking for another half hour, they found a large camp of people. The strangest thing was that they were this far out into the wildlands, and most of them were still level 1 and weaponless. Joe was concerned, but the people seemed happy enough. He went over to one of the people and asked where they were going. The man looked at him blankly, then took in his garb, weapon, and the similar state of the people with Joe. "Oh, hey there. I thought you'd just gotten separated from us." The man smiled cheerfully and waved at Joe as he got closer. "We're going to our guild's area. There are so many people coming in with non-combat classes that some guilds are starting various divisions. We're going to be a part of the farming division. Plenty of work, food, shelter, protection from monsters." "What do you get out of doing the work? I assume you're going to be feeding the guild?" Joe looked at the man quizzically. "What do you mean?" The farmer seemed confused, then angry. "I just told you. Food, shelter, protection from monsters. You're willingly going off to be a serf in a feudalistic system?" Joe bluntly asked the guy. "For how long?" "Until I can go back to my house in Iowa, dude." The soon-to-be farmer started to walk away, fists clenched. "Leave me alone." Joe was flabbergasted. He had no idea how someone could so willingly and cheerfully just give up. Did he even look into the guild that he had joined? Looked at options? Then he remembered that there were so many people joining right now that there was no realistic way for them to make demands of potential employers. With such a huge workforce arriving, there would always be someone else that would take any job. No questions asked. Joe was suddenly afraid for the future of this continent. Guilds would still be subject to the crown, but would likely be making their own little kingdoms all over the place. Let's get out of here, guys." Joe started walking past the giant camp full of refugees, only just now realizing that almost everyone that had come from Earth suddenly fit into that horrific category. He needed to do something that would help them all of humanity. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It would be a long journey. They had gotten about a half-mile away from the camp when Alexis suddenly spoke up. "Joe, I'm seeing is that a pride of lions? Are we in a different biome than our area or something? Anyway, I think they're going after that camp. Should we go after them?" Not even a question. Joe flicked his eyes in the direction she was indicating, only seeing long grass swaying against the wind from this distance. Anything will tear through that group of level 1s, and even if they have people that are guarding them, they can't be everywhere. Let's go. They started on an interception course for the lions, and as they closed in, the grass stopped moving. Apparently, the ambush was set. "Alexis?" "Oh, I'm all over this." She swept her cloak to the side, and her massive crossbow flipped over her shoulder and settled in front of her. Alexis pulled off the quarrel that was attached and slotted in a bolt that was more barrel than arrow. She fired the bolt into the area with the cats, and a huge nova of poison expanded from the impact zone. A guttural roar destroyed any concern that the group had been wrong. A lioness bounded out toward them, then another, and another. 9 lionesses in total were coming after the humans, followed by a brute of a lion. "I like my skin intact. Yes, I do. I like my skin intact." How about you?" Bard chanted into the air, and Joe was graced with a notification that he would take 9% less slashing damage for 30 minutes. "New song, Bard?" Jackson beamed at the scald, then went back to studying the cats running at them. "I really like it. I haven't had much luck with singing lately. Still working on this one." Bard's voice betrayed his embarrassment. Then the cats had arrived, and there was no more time for feelings like doubt or concern. There was only surviving and making sure that their opponent didn't. Chapter 14. Alexis was the first person to get off another attack, her handheld crossbow's bolts zipping through the air to plunge into the leading lioness. The huge cat roared at her and leaped nearly 30 feet forward with outstretched claws. As fast as the cat moved, Joe was still able to send out and solidify a shadow spike. The leap was halted only feet away from Alexis, and the lioness scrabbled at her punctured chest in an attempt to destroy whatever it was that was causing pain. Poppy glided forward and pulled his arm back, thrusting forward with a deadly hiss emanating from his rapier. The lioness he was targeting forced herself down, and the rapier missed her face and instead penetrated into her shoulder. The cat snarled and retaliated with an instant paw swipe that Poppy somehow moved with, removing his rapier with a twist that sent blood and gray fluid flying. The third cat raced between the two that were injured, going through the open space to target Joe. The humans were in a bad position, and only the fact that Bard was standing next to Joe and was eager to get into the fight kept Joe from having claws scraping his shell. The Scald waded into combat with a whirl of his axes, the metal forcing the lioness to flatten herself to avoid losing more than just a few whiskers. Jackson moved forward on Alexis's left, catching the next cat that was trying to attack the out-of-formation crossbow user. He body-checked the cat, knocking it to the side and getting a slash across the rib cage for his trouble. A second lioness reached Poppy and tried to take him to the ground, but only managed to knock the duelist back a step. Poppy was using some kind of footwork pattern that allowed him to keep upright and mobile while he was in a fight, and it was showing its worth here. A second lioness hit Jackson, then a third on Poppy. Another circled to Poppy's right and came after Bard as he fought off the first, and another piled into Alexis's area. Now there were two lionesses on Bard, Alexis and Jackson, while there were three being fended off by Poppy. Joe targeted Jackson with a healing spell, closing the gash in his side. Then he formed a shadow spike under the extremely poisoned lioness fighting Poppy, while at the same time, Alexis got off a shot at the lioness that had first attacked her. The bolt slamming into its head was enough to bring it down, though the bolt head only slightly penetrated the thick skull bone. The lioness had simply taken enough damage, lost enough blood, and the area poisoning had been particularly nasty. The cost for Alexis to get her attack off was a paw to her chest that tore open her flesh to the bone, as well as breaking a few of her ribs. She tumbled back in total shock at the sudden pain. Joe's spike had impaled and held the damaged lioness that had been fighting Poppy, allowing the man to focus on the other two as the light went out of the first's eyes. He swiped back and forth with his wasp stinger rapier, holding them back, but dealing no damage. "Alexis!" Joe called, realizing her predicament even as the lioness was jumping at her. Joe jumped first, covering her body with his own and using lay on hands to reverse the damage that had been done to her. The lioness landed on Joe, pressing him down with its body weight, but clawing ineffectually at his shell. The reduction to slashing damage was showing its usefulness here, all the way until the cat got its mouth around Joe's arm and started trying to rip it off. A bolt bounced off of Joe's shell, reducing its durability further, and Alexis growled, "Can't get a shot. Getting crushed." Cat meowing. The strange sounds reached Joe's ears just before he was showered with blood and tufts of fur. He sputtered as the huge weight of the cat suddenly vanished, looking up to see Jackson gripping the lioness and tearing chunks of flesh off of it. No, he wasn't. His hands were. T-Rex heads swallowed globs of meat, and Jackson was tackled from the side by one of the cats he was still fighting with. The chiropractor rolled with the blow and ended up on the lioness's back, riding her like a bucking bronco even as he continued to punch in one spot with his toothy, hungry hands. Jackson hopped off and seemed to concentrate, and the cat's spine just twisted. The animal fell, and Joe realized that he was neglecting his support duties to the rest of the team in order to watch a single fight. Joe turned to help Bard, who was bleeding from several nasty wounds. The Scald had apparently not been able to land a hit on the creatures he was fighting, and like the cats they were, Bard was being toyed with in preparation for a kill. As Joe sent a stream of healing water to Bard, he saw that Poppy's health was dropping quickly as well, though he didn't seem to have any massive wounds. After the spell hit Bard, Joe slammed his staff to the ground with both hands and channeled a powerful group heal to all of his party members. At the cost of about 55 mana per second, he healed all of them for 32.5 health per second. This was enough to close the wound Poppy had in an opened artery, and replenished his blood enough for him to continue moving at a fast pace. Joe only managed to cast the spell for 2 seconds before being taken off his feet by the lion finally joining combat. The huge creature clamped down on Joe with its teeth and shook back and forth, even as it used its front paws to tear at his body. Joe could hear people shouting, but all he could do was try to form a spell to fight back against the lion. His staff fell from his hand after a particularly vicious shake, and Joe cast the only spell that he could think of. His muscle memory and the ease of the spell allowed him to dual cast Acid Spray. Its extreme close range made it so that the lion was soaked by the spell, and he was able to continue channeling for a full second before he lost concentration. Joe's shell broke, and instantly there were teeth tearing into his arm while claws ripped at his side and acid dripped onto him. Joe screamed in pain, his low constitution and high perception allowing him to feel every second of this agony. The lion was hit from the side, and the weight was taken off of Joe. The pain didn't end, though, and the addition of rolling allowed the multi-hundred-pound creature to rip his arm off. Joe was bleeding horrifically, and only his total shock allowed him to cast Lay on Hands on himself. This spell was so powerful now that he could heal 10 more damage than he had total health, bringing him up to maximum health in an instant. The main issue was that a thick layer of scar tissue formed over the hole in his side where his arm should be, and the limb was still in the lion's mouth. The sudden lack of pain had set his mind whirling, and Joe could only stare as his team worked to finish off the lion. It had way more health than Joe thought it should as only a basic creature. He slowly blinked, opening his eyes to Poppy, sliding his rapier into the lion, and having it roar at him while dropping a mangled arm to the ground. Blink. Jackson was laughing maniacally as his hands bit off the lion's tail. Blink. Bard was under the lion, his axes crossed and holding the jaws back from clamping down. Joe blinked again, and the lion was on its side. They had defeated it. Yay. Bard came over with an odd-shaped stick. No, that was his arm. Joe watched as Bard lifted an axe and swung it at him, a light red glow appearing around him as his axe sliced off the scar tissue that had appeared over Joe's armhole. The pain shocked him again out of whatever state of mind he had been in. Bard was speaking. There you go, big guy. Come on now. Heal this up, and then cleanse yourself. I bet you'll get a nasty bug otherwise. Joe numbly cast Mend on himself, and suddenly had feeling in his arm again. He screamed as new flesh formed on the demolished arm out of the healing water. Why would the nerves be the first thing to heal? The injustice of it made Joe come back to himself, and as his arm pain settled into a dull ache, he began healing his torn-to-shreds team. Strangely, it was Jackson that had the most damage, not Bard. The bite marks. Jackson, what happened? Oh, these. Jackson smiled nervously. T-Rex are good little babies. They just don't know how to show affection yet. We're working on training to nuzzle, but I only get a few seconds at a time to teach them not to bite me. At least it's only love nibbles. Jackson. Joe was shocked at how long he needed to cast his healing for. You took at least 400 damage. Nibbles, Jackson petulantly asserted. How's the arm, Joe? Alexis pointedly changed the conversation. Infected, he sighed, and started casting Cleanse on himself. A few seconds later, the plague marker vanished. I'm really glad I didn't wait to cure that. I had the plague for a moment there. I can't even imagine what would happen if these got loose in the camp back there. I can. Jackson raised a hand. The humans would have likely died. A large chunk of them. Any survivors would have run to a population center and tried to find shelter, inadvertently spreading the plague to whoever was there. There was a long silence and Joe shrugged. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad we killed them off. Anyone else infected? If not, let's destroy these bodies. Acid spray! They got to work and Joe was suddenly flooded with messages. Experience 360, 40 lioness times 9. Experience 50, 50 lion times 1. Zone quest complete. Plague of Pride. You managed to stop an outbreak of plague before it managed to spread to the local population. Reward, 100 experience. Skill increase. Channeling. Beginner 3. Skill increase. Acid spray. Beginner 2. You realize that this spell was designed for cleaning out landfills, right? How little do you think of your enemies? Skill increase. Exquisite shell. Novice 6. You're on your way to becoming a frontline fighter. Go you! Wait. Huh. Odd that there was no reward other than experience for the quest. Then Joe remembered that he hadn't even opened the common item reward he had gotten a while back, and he rubbed his hands together. I guess I can open that and pretend it's a reward for this. Chapter 15. Joe opened his reward box after melting the lions with acid spray. He had sat a little apart, hoping that it would be something cool enough that he didn't want to show it off right away. As the box popped open, Joe saw what appeared to be... He had no idea, at least until he got the notification. Item gained. Ritui Architect Survey Grid. Artificially rare. No more measuring out distances for buildings by hand. This item allows you to get exact measurements for the perimeter and area of any building you plan to build, and displays a soft-like building to mark out exactly where it will be placed. Joe looked at the item, which appeared to be a small solar light from Earth. It had a spike on the bottom, obviously designed to be pushed into the ground, and a mirrored panel on the top. All in all, a not very impressive tool, but hopefully useful either way. Ready to get a move on, Joe? Alexis called over to him. It's already afternoon and I want to see if we can find a shrine before dark. I know we all brought camping gear, but if we don't need to sleep outside, I'll be much happier in the morning. Fair point. Joe got to his feet and stood, pausing and frowning as he got a new notification. Skill increase. Mental Manipulation Resistance, Novice 5. Where did that come from? Joe thought about his recent battle, as well as searching the area. He was pretty sure he got that increase due to dwelling on his injury during combat and not shaking it off right away like he was supposed to do. But would that mean getting badly injured in the future would cause him to dwell on and remember more pain? How long would it take for the skill to break him? As much as Joe wanted to empower all of his skills, this one was certainly an exception. Joe thought about this issue for a long while as they walked across the huge savanna-style area they had recently entered. It was strange how suddenly and radically the landscape could shift in this world. At least they had found where the lions had come from, but Joe was finding that he preferred his spot in the northern forests. The heat was also slowly increasing, and as night came along, the area began to come alive. It seemed that most of the creatures in this area were going to end up being nocturnal. And, hold up a moment. Alexis stopped them, then took a few steps off the path and pointed. Can anyone tell me what that looks like? The group gathered around and looked. Sure enough, there was a recognizable track in the ground. Jackson shrugged and shook his head. Not a clue. Dirt, mud that dried, sand. Is there going to be a quiz on this later?